The clock on the wall ticked loudly as Michael Hayes sat at the back of the seminar room, trying to suppress the nerves that swirled in his stomach. He had been dreaming of this moment for years, finally sitting in a classroom at one of the most prestigious universities in the country. Yet, as he looked around the room, all he felt was the weight of being an outsider. He wasn't like the other students here. His classmates were sons and daughters of the elite, polished in their confidence, their accents, and their clothes. Michael, on the other hand, was from a small town, the son of a single mother who had fought tooth and nail to give him this chance. He could already sense the judgment in the air, thick and palpable. It wasn't just the glances from his classmates that made him uncomfortable. It was the unspoken question in their eyes: what was a black kid from a working-class neighborhood doing in a room full of the best and brightest? Michael tried to shake off the feeling, refocusing on the lecture. The professor, Dr. Williamson, paced the front of the room, his voice deep and authoritative, explaining a complex theory about quantum mechanics. Michael's mind was racing, trying to keep up with the flow of ideas. But then, Dr. Williamson stopped abruptly, his sharp eyes scanning the class. "Let's see if anyone can solve this problem," Dr. Williamson said, a gleam of challenge in his eyes. "What's the significance of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle in relation to the Schrödinger equation?" The room fell silent, and every student's eyes turned to the board. Michael's heart skipped a beat. He had studied this material for weeks. His mother had always told him, "You've got what it takes. But you have to prove it to them, every single time." This was his chance. Dr. Williamson's gaze landed on Michael. "Yes, you," he said, as if picking him out deliberately. The laughter began almost immediately. It was subtle at first, the polite snickers of students who believed they were better than him. Michael could feel their eyes burning into him, waiting for him to fail. He had seen this before, this assumption that he wasn't smart enough, capable enough to be here. But Michael didn't falter. He stood up, taking a deep breath, his mind laser-focused. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle states that we cannot simultaneously know both the position and momentum of a particle with absolute precision. However, when applied to Schrödinger's equation, it explains the probabilistic nature of particles in quantum mechanics. It demonstrates that the wave function can never fully predict a particle's exact location, only the probability of finding it at a certain point. There was a brief pause. Then the room erupted with laughter. Michael felt his face flush, but he refused to back down. His answer had been correct. Yet, the mockery stung, and the judgment from the professors and students alike was palpable. They didn't care about accuracy or depth, they only cared about appearances. "You think that's it, Hayes?" Dr. Williamson scoffed, clearly enjoying the moment. "You honestly believe that's a solution?" He shook his head, his voice dripping with disdain. "Perhaps you'll have a better answer next time." Michael's hands balled into fists, but he kept his posture straight. He could feel the heat of embarrassment creeping up his neck, but he wasn't going to let it show. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of knowing how badly they'd hurt him. The bell rang, signaling the end of the lecture, but Michael barely noticed. His classmates packed up their things, chattering and laughing, while he sat there frozen, replaying the scene in his mind. The worst part wasn't the ridicule, it was the fact that deep down, he had expected it. As he made his way out of the room, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see Dr. Sarah Brooks, one of the more respected professors in the department. She gave him a nod of acknowledgement, but Michael couldn't quite read the expression on her face. "Don't let them get to you," she said quietly. "It's not about them. It's about you proving you belong here." Her words struck him harder than he cared to admit. He knew she was right. This was just one battle in a long war he had to fight, but it didn't make it any easier. Michael left the room, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The campus was alive with the usual energy, students chatting, walking between classes, absorbed in their own worlds. But for Michael, it felt like he was in a bubble, an outsider watching the world continue without him. He tried to tell himself that this was just one setback. That it didn't matter. But as he passed by groups of students laughing and joking, he couldn't help but feel isolated. He reached his dorm room and flopped onto his bed, staring at the ceiling. It felt like the walls were closing in, suffocating him with doubt. Was he truly capable of thriving in this environment? Or was he just another black kid who had been given an opportunity that he couldn't handle? But then, he thought about his mom. She had always told him that he was special, that his potential was limitless. She had sacrificed so much to get him here, to give him a shot at success. Michael clenched his fists. No. He wasn't going to give up now. Not when he had come this far. He had worked too hard, and he had too much riding on this. The professors may have laughed at him today, but they didn't know him. They didn't know the hunger that burned inside him, the fire that would not be extinguished by their dismissive sneers. Michael sat up on the edge of his bed and pulled out his textbook. He wasn't going to let this moment define him. He was going to prove them wrong. Not tomorrow. Not next week. But right now. His journey had just begun, and he was ready for the challenge. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Michael Hayes sat at his desk in the small dorm room, trying to focus on the lecture notes that lay before him. But his mind wandered, as it often did when the weight of everything seemed to press down too hard. It wasn't the textbooks or the impossible equations that weighed most on his shoulders, it was the constant reminder of where he came from, the burden of a past that never fully let him go. As he glanced around at the unfamiliar space, the stark white walls and sterile atmosphere of a university dorm seemed so different from the life he had left behind. Growing up in a small town in Cedar Ridge, North Carolina, Michael had been surrounded by a tight-knit community where everyone knew each other's business. The quiet streets, the humble homes, and the familiar faces were all part of a world that seemed far removed from the elite university life he was now navigating. But there was one thing that Cedar Ridge had taught him: how to fight. Every day, Michael fought against the stereotypes that came with being a black kid in a mostly white town. He wasn't supposed to be the star student, the one who stood out, the one who made waves. He was supposed to be happy with the bare minimum, just like everyone else. But Michael had never been satisfied with just enough. It all started with his mother, Angela Hayes. She was the heart of the family, a woman who had sacrificed everything to make sure her son had the opportunities she had never been given. Angela was a single mother who worked long hours at a local diner, scrubbing dishes and waiting tables to make ends meet. Yet, she never complained. She always found a way to make the most of what little they had. Michael remembered the countless nights she would sit with him at the kitchen table, teaching him how to read and do math when he was just a little boy. Her worn hands would carefully guide his through the pages of a book, her voice soft but firm as she taught him that education was the way out. "You can be anything you want to be, Michael," she would say with a smile, though the lines on her face told a different story. She had always believed in him, even when the world around them didn't. And Michael believed in her too. She was his everything. When he was in high school, Michael realized how hard his mother worked to make sure he had every opportunity to succeed. He remembered the times she came home exhausted, but she'd never let him see the toll it took on her. Even when money was tight, she found a way to send him to summer programs, buy him textbooks, and make sure he had everything he needed to chase his dreams. There were days when Michael couldn't keep up with his classmates. Days when the weight of his mother's struggles hung over him, but he couldn't stop. He couldn't let her sacrifice be in vain. His mother had shown him that resilience wasn't just about enduring pain, it was about using it as fuel to rise above. The high school years were difficult. There were whispers, sideways glances, and people who tried to make him feel like an outsider. But Michael pushed through. It wasn't about fitting in, it was about succeeding. He became the top student in his class, pushing himself to be the best he could be. He wasn't just doing it for himself, but for his mother, who had taught him that hard work always pays off. When it came time for college applications, Michael had no doubt about where he wanted to go. He had worked for this. He had earned it. But applying to an Ivy League university was a stretch for someone from his background. Cedar Ridge wasn't the kind of place where kids went to Princeton or Harvard. Michael was told time and again that he was dreaming too big, that people like him didn't get into places like that. But Michael didn't care. His mother's words echoed in his head, "You can be anything you want to be." So, he applied. And when the acceptance letter came, his hands trembled as he opened it. He had been accepted into Princeton University. It felt like a dream, and for a moment, he thought it might be. But reality hit quickly. This wasn't just an achievement, it was a challenge, a world that was unfamiliar and unforgiving. He'd never seen a campus so large, so intimidating. He was now surrounded by students who came from money, from families with histories of success. Their clothes, their confidence, it all seemed so effortless. They didn't have to fight for everything. They didn't have to prove themselves. But Michael did. And that's why, when the laughter rang out in Dr. Williamson's class earlier that day, Michael wasn't entirely surprised. It wasn't the first time someone had underestimated him, had doubted him because of where he came from. Cedar Ridge wasn't a place that produced Ivy League students, much less students who could outsmart the very professors who had earned their places at Princeton. But Michael didn't mind. In fact, he thrived in those moments. Michael leaned back in his chair, his eyes tracing the lines of his mother's favorite book, a well-worn copy of The Great Gatsby, which she had gifted him before he left for Princeton. He remembered how she had smiled and said, "You're going to be the one to rewrite your story, Michael. Don't let anyone else tell it for you." It was that belief that kept him going. He wasn't going to let the professors at Princeton laugh at him. He wasn't going to let his classmates mock him. And he wasn't going to let the world define who he was. He had come too far, fought too hard. The path ahead was going to be difficult. The elitism and prejudice he faced at Princeton would only grow more intense, but Michael wasn't going to back down. He wasn't going to be the kid from Cedar Ridge anymore. He was going to be Michael Hayes, the brilliant mind, the one who changed everything. Tomorrow, he would prove them wrong. And this time, they wouldn't laugh. The days following Michael's embarrassing moment in Dr. Williamson's class were a blur. It was as if the university had shifted into a slow-motion reel, with everyone moving around him as though he was invisible. He attended classes, took notes, and did his best to keep his head down. The whispers, though quieter now, were still there, lingering in the air like an invisible cloud. It was clear, he had become the subject of conversation among his peers. Michael knew this wasn't going to be easy. He knew that being a black student at Princeton was going to be different, but he hadn't anticipated how isolating it would feel. He could see the difference in how the professors interacted with him compared to his classmates. Dr. Williamson had dismissed him with a glance, but it was the subtle dismissals from others that hurt the most. In his physics seminar, Professor Carter, a middle-aged man with a permanent scowl, asked him the same question twice, but when Michael gave an answer, Carter didn't seem to acknowledge it as much as he did the answers from the other students. Carter would glance at the white students in the front row, nodding approvingly at their answers, while Michael's response seemed to just float in the air. He could feel the difference. And it wasn't just in class. The cafeteria had become a battlefield. He often found himself sitting alone, eating quickly, and avoiding eye contact with the clusters of students chatting in tight-knit groups. Sometimes, when he walked past groups of students, he caught the tail end of their conversations. It was hard to ignore their subtle, yet pointed, remarks. One afternoon, as he walked out of the library, two students came out of nowhere. Michael didn't recognize them, but their laughter echoed in his ears. They looked him up and down before one of them spoke. "You're that kid from the physics lecture, aren't you?" one of them said with a smirk. "Man, you really thought you had that answer, huh?" Michael didn't respond. He kept walking, head held high. "I think they just let anyone in these days," the second student added, and they both laughed as if they had shared some great inside joke. Michael's fists clenched at his sides, but he kept walking, unwilling to let their taunts get to him. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. But when he got back to his room that night, he slammed the door shut and sat at his desk, the weight of the world pressing down on him. He knew this was only the beginning. The next few days were a test of his patience. Professor Carter continued to treat him like an invisible force in the class, only acknowledging his presence when absolutely necessary. Even the students who had once exchanged polite smiles with him had begun to distance themselves. He felt the cold sting of exclusion each time someone walked past him without so much as a nod. In his dorm room, Michael flipped through pages of his textbook, trying to focus on the quantum mechanics principles that were still so foreign to him. The material wasn't easy, but it wasn't the subject matter that was the hardest to manage. It was the emotional toll that wore him down. That night, after hours of rereading the same page, he finally decided to step out for some fresh air. He needed to clear his head. Walking across campus under the dim glow of the streetlights, Michael found a small bench tucked away by the side of a courtyard. He wasn't expecting anyone to be there, but as he sat down, he heard a voice. "You look like you could use someone to talk to." Michael looked up, surprised. Standing there was Dr. Sarah Brooks, the professor who had offered him some words of encouragement after the physics lecture. She was one of the few professors at Princeton who didn't seem to fit the mold of the aloof, disconnected educators that Michael had encountered. Dr. Brooks was young, early 30s, maybe, and had a kind, approachable demeanor. Michael hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "Yeah, I guess I could." "Mind if I sit?" she asked, gesturing to the empty space next to him. "Not at all," Michael said, making room for her. She sat down beside him, folding her arms across her chest as if contemplating how to broach the subject. "You looked like you were taking a beating in that lecture the other day," she said gently. "I've been watching. You're smarter than most of them realize." Michael glanced at her, unsure if he should trust her words. Was she just being polite? Or was she genuinely trying to help? "I know it's not easy," Dr. Brooks continued. "Being here, I mean. Especially when the odds seem stacked against you. I've been there. Not the same as your experience, of course, but I understand what it feels like to walk into a room and feel like you're not welcome." Michael sighed, his shoulders slumping as the weight of his emotions finally seemed to settle. "It's just hard," he said quietly. "I feel like no matter how hard I try, it's never enough. I come from a town where no one expects me to even get this far. And now, I'm here. But I feel like I don't belong. Like they're just waiting for me to mess up." Dr. Brooks nodded, her gaze softening. "I won't pretend to know exactly what you're going through. But I do know this, people like us don't get where we are by taking the easy path. You've already proven you belong here. But now, you have to fight. Fight for yourself, for your space. You can't let them make you feel small." Michael's eyes met hers. For the first time since arriving at Princeton, he felt like someone truly understood the pressure he was under. Dr. Brooks wasn't just offering words of encouragement, she was acknowledging the weight of his struggle. She smiled gently. "You're not alone in this. And you'll get through it, Michael. I have no doubt." As they sat together in the quiet of the night, Michael realized something. The journey ahead was going to be brutal. But he wasn't going to face it alone. He had to start believing in himself, even if the rest of the world was against him. He wasn't just going to survive at Princeton. He was going to thrive. The next day, as he sat in the lecture hall for Dr. Williamson's class again, he could feel a shift. Michael had always been the quiet observer, the student who answered questions only when he knew for certain. But today was different. He wasn't going to back down. Not anymore. Dr. Williamson's voice echoed in the lecture hall, outlining a difficult problem on the board. Michael's hand shot up before he could second-guess himself. The room fell silent. Dr. Williamson stared at him for a moment, almost as if he were surprised by Michael's boldness. Then, with a reluctant nod, he gestured for him to speak. Michael took a deep breath. This time, when he answered the question, he didn't just give a textbook response. He challenged the very premise, adding his own unique spin on the theory. His voice was steady, his confidence palpable. The professor's expression faltered. The students in the room were silent. For the first time, Michael felt like he had truly made an impact. Michael sat in a crowded lecture hall, trying to keep his focus as Dr. Williamson discussed the finer points of thermodynamics. He could hear the low murmurs of his classmates around him, their voices a blend of casual chatter and hushed whispers. But Michael had tuned them out. This time, the constant buzz of doubt and judgment didn't distract him. Instead, he was determined to prove something to himself. It had been a week since his bold answer in Dr. Williamson's class. While the professor had acknowledged his response with a terse nod, the tension in the room had been palpable. Michael wasn't sure if it had earned him respect or simply confirmed the whispers about his audacity. But either way, something inside him had clicked. He wasn't just here to survive the academic rigor of Princeton, he was here to dominate it. As the class went on, Dr. Williamson posed another question, an intricate problem involving the application of the second law of thermodynamics. Michael felt the familiar stir of anticipation. The room fell silent, all eyes flicking toward him. He raised his hand without hesitation, his pulse quickening. The last time he had done this, it had felt like an act of rebellion. Today, it felt like instinct. Dr. Williamson hesitated for a fraction of a second before gesturing for him to speak. Michael stood, his palms slightly sweaty but his voice steady. The second law of thermodynamics tells us that entropy in a closed system always increases, Michael began, his voice clear and confident. But we can examine the boundary conditions in non-ideal systems. In these systems, the energy dissipation can be minimized, particularly when considering external influences that push a system out of equilibrium. The room grew silent, the other students listening intently as Michael spoke with authority. He could feel the eyes of his peers on him, the unspoken judgment still there but now less pronounced. As he continued to break down the problem with an additional layer of complexity, Michael noticed Dr. Williamson's furrowed brow. It was a look of concentration, not dismissiveness. When Michael finished, the room stayed silent for a moment, the weight of the answer hanging in the air. Then, Dr. Williamson nodded slowly. "Interesting perspective, Mr. Hayes," he said, though his voice lacked the condescending edge it once held. "We'll discuss this further after class." Michael sat down, his heart still pounding in his chest. He had done it. He had answered a complex problem in front of the class, and not just correctly, but with an insight that was beyond the surface-level understanding that his peers had shown. It felt like the first victory in a long series of battles he knew he had to fight. Later that day, Michael found himself walking across campus, the weight of the lecture still fresh in his mind. But there was a difference this time. He didn't feel the usual sense of doubt creeping in. Instead, for the first time since arriving at Princeton, he felt a sense of accomplishment, something that had been sorely lacking in his life recently. It was then that he spotted Sarah Brooks, the professor who had encouraged him to stand tall. She was sitting on the steps outside the building where they had first spoken. Michael hesitated for a moment, then approached her. "Hey, Dr. Brooks," he said, trying to keep his voice casual. She looked up, her warm smile greeting him. "You look like you've got something on your mind," she remarked, her eyes scanning his face. "Was the lecture that difficult?" Michael couldn't help but smile. "No, actually. It felt pretty good. I just had a breakthrough today in Dr. Williamson's class." "Really?" Dr. Brooks raised an eyebrow. "Tell me about it." As Michael recounted the events of the morning, he found himself growing more animated. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't holding back. He explained how he had tackled the thermodynamics problem, adding his own twist to the solution. Dr. Brooks listened carefully, nodding along as he spoke. "That's impressive, Michael," she said when he finished. "I'm proud of you." The praise felt different coming from her, genuine, rather than forced. It was the kind of encouragement Michael had been craving, the kind that reminded him why he was here in the first place. "Thank you," Michael said, his voice softening. "It's just, sometimes I feel like I have to prove myself every single day. I can't just be a student here. I have to be better than everyone else. Otherwise, they'll never take me seriously." Dr. Brooks' expression shifted to one of understanding. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone but yourself," she said, her voice warm but firm. "That's what will set you apart. Don't forget why you're here, Michael. You belong here just as much as anyone else." Over the next few weeks, Michael found himself in a rhythm. The whispers didn't stop completely, but they grew quieter. His classmates were no longer dismissing him. Some began to ask him for help with their assignments, eager to get a taste of his expertise. And though it stung at first, he was the one who had been laughed at. After all, Michael realized something crucial: this was the game he was meant to play. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about thriving. Every time he overcame a challenge, every time he added depth to his answers, every time he refused to let the doubts of others define him, he was pushing back against the forces that tried to hold him back. It wasn't long before word began to spread. The quiet kid from Cedar Ridge was no longer just a background character in Princeton's world. He was becoming a force to be reckoned with. One afternoon, while he was working in the library, a familiar figure approached his table. It was David Whitaker, one of the more prominent students in the physics department. David had a reputation. He was known for his intellect, his impressive academic history, and his arrogant demeanor. Michael had noticed him before, always surrounded by a small group of followers. David's gaze was sharp, as if he had something to prove. "Hey, Hayes," David said, his tone neutral but with a slight edge. "I've been hearing a lot of things about you." Michael raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. He wasn't in the mood for confrontation. David leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I heard you aced that thermodynamics problem the other day. You think you can keep up with the rest of us? It's not going to be that easy. You're not the first person to come here thinking they can outsmart everyone. Trust me, it gets a lot harder from here." Michael met David's eyes. He could feel the challenge in David's words. But instead of feeling intimidated, he felt something else: resolve. "I'm not trying to outsmart anyone," Michael said calmly. "I'm just here to do my best. If that's enough to keep up, then so be it. But don't mistake my presence for weakness. I'm not backing down." David seemed taken aback for a moment, his usual bravado faltering. Michael didn't wait for him to respond. Instead, he gathered his books and stood up, leaving the table and walking out of the library. As Michael stepped out into the crisp air, he felt a surge of confidence. This was his moment. The road ahead was full of obstacles, but Michael wasn't going to let anyone, or anything, stop him. He was ready for whatever came next. The next battle was coming, and he would be ready to fight. The weeks that followed Michael's confrontation with David Whitaker marked a new chapter in his journey at Princeton. The atmosphere around him had shifted. He no longer felt like a shadow in the back of the lecture hall or a voice that went unheard. But despite the subtle gains he'd made, Michael was far from complacent. He knew that each victory, no matter how small, was just a stepping stone. It wasn't just his peers who were starting to notice his presence. In fact, Professor Williamson had recently requested a private meeting with him. Michael wasn't sure what to expect, whether it was another lecture about his audacity or perhaps an opportunity to prove himself further. It was late in the afternoon when Michael received the email from Dr. Williamson. "Mr. Hayes, please come to my office after your next class. I would like to discuss your recent contributions to the thermodynamics discussion." The email sent a ripple of nervousness through Michael. He stared at the screen for a moment, then grabbed his jacket and walked out of his dorm room. He knew this meeting could be a turning point, either for better or worse. When Michael arrived at Dr. Williamson's office, he stood in front of the door for a moment, hesitating. He took a deep breath before knocking softly. "Come in, Dr. Williamson called from inside. Michael pushed the door open, revealing a sparse, book-filled office. Dr. Williamson sat behind his desk, his sharp features framed by the soft glow of a desk lamp. The professor looked up as Michael entered, giving him a long, assessing look before gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. "Sit, Mr. Hayes," Dr. Williamson said. Michael obeyed, a little uneasy but determined to keep his composure. "Now, I wanted to talk to you about your performance in class," Dr. Williamson began, folding his hands on the desk. "I've been teaching here for over 20 years, and I've seen students of all kinds. Some are brilliant, others are just going through the motions. You, however, seem to have something different. Your answer to the thermodynamics question, though unconventional, was insightful." Michael blinked, surprised. This was not the condescending lecture he had expected. Dr. Williamson continued. "I'm aware that you've faced some challenges, particularly being a new student here," Dr. Williamson said, his voice softer than usual. "I also know the dynamics that come with being one of the few black students in a field dominated by people who don't always understand what it means to walk a different path. I can see that you're capable, Michael. But here's the thing, you have to keep proving it. You'll always have to prove it." Michael nodded slowly, taking in his words. "And there's something else I want you to consider," Dr. Williamson continued. "You can't let the struggle to prove yourself to others consume you. You have to prove it to yourself first. That's the key." For a moment, Michael was silent. The professor's words hit him deeply. He wasn't just here to fight for respect from others, he was here to fight for his own sense of worth, his own belief in his ability to succeed. "I'll be watching you, Mr. Hayes," Dr. Williamson added, leaning forward slightly. "Keep pushing yourself. You're not done yet." The meeting left Michael with a sense of clarity, but also a renewed pressure. There was no going back now. Dr. Williamson had challenged him to rise even higher, and Michael felt that challenge deep within him. He didn't just want to survive this place, he wanted to excel and prove, not only to his professors and classmates but also to himself, that he belonged here. Over the next few days, Michael threw himself into his work with a renewed sense of purpose. He spent extra hours in the library, poring over lecture notes and solving complex problems. His mind buzzed with the concepts, and he found himself connecting ideas in new ways. But the pressure weighed on him in ways he hadn't anticipated. His determination to rise above his doubts and the eyes of those who had written him off also came with the risk of burnout. As he sat in the university's quiet study room one evening, staring at his open textbook, Michael realized just how much he had been pushing himself. The door to the study room creaked open, and Sarah Brooks stepped in, her eyes scanning the room before landing on Michael. "Hey, Michael," she said, her voice warm as she approached him. "You look like you've been at this for hours." Michael glanced at his watch. It was nearly 10 p.m. He had been so immersed in his studies that he had lost track of time. "I'm just trying to stay ahead," he replied, his voice tight. "I've got a lot to prove, you know." Sarah nodded, pulling out a chair and sitting across from him. "I get it. But you need to take care of yourself too. You're pushing yourself harder than anyone else here. It's not healthy to burn out before you even get started." Michael leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "I don't really have a choice. Everyone's watching me. I need to show that I belong here. Every day." Sarah gave him a sympathetic look, but then her expression changed to one of determination. "Michael, you already belong here. You're not just fighting for others to see that. You're fighting for your own self-belief. You've got to find a balance. You won't succeed if you burn out." He looked at her, his mind whirling with the advice. Deep down, he knew she was right. But in the moment, it felt impossible to slow down. "I don't know if I can. I don't know how to." Sarah smiled softly. "You can. Trust me. It's about trusting yourself and knowing when to push, and when to step back and breathe. The next few days passed in a blur of classes, late-night study sessions, and brief interactions with his peers. The isolation he had once felt was slowly being replaced with a sense of camaraderie. His classmates had started to acknowledge his contributions more openly, and even David Whittaker, who had once been an opponent in the academic social hierarchy, gave him a curt nod one afternoon after a particularly challenging discussion on general relativity. Michael's confidence was growing, but so were the stakes. He had become aware that, despite his progress, there were still hurdles ahead. The pressure was mounting, and he knew he couldn't keep pushing himself without stopping to reassess his limits. Then, an unexpected twist came during one of his late-night study sessions in the library. It was just past midnight when Emily, a student who had been a quiet presence in Michael's classes, approached his table. She was someone he had only exchanged pleasantries with before, but her presence tonight felt different. "Hey, Michael," she said softly. "I've been wanting to ask you something." Michael raised an eyebrow, setting down his textbook. "Sure. What's up?" "I've been following your progress in class," she said, her voice tentative. "You're really killing it with these problems. Honestly, it's impressive." Michael wasn't sure what to say. He had never thought much of his reputation among his classmates. But something in Emily's tone made him realize that the whispers and sideways glances weren't always as negative as they had once seemed. "Thanks," Michael said, his voice a little warmer than usual. "I'm just trying to keep up." Emily hesitated, then spoke again. "I wanted to say, don't let them get to you. The people who are still talking down to you, they're just scared. You're pushing boundaries, and they don't like that." Michael paused, the weight of her words sinking in. She was right. The more he succeeded, the more he would be watched. But instead of breaking him down, it should propel him forward. With each passing day, Michael's resolve grew. There would be more challenges, more opposition, and more moments when he would feel the weight of the world bearing down on him. But Michael had learned one crucial lesson: he wasn't alone. The journey was far from over, but Michael was no longer the invisible student. He had broken the barrier, and now it was time to prove what he was truly capable of. Michael's life at Princeton had shifted from a fight for recognition to a careful balancing act. The whispers that had once plagued him were no longer as frequent. In fact, they had almost disappeared entirely. But that didn't mean the pressure had lifted. If anything, it had intensified. With every success, the stakes grew higher. Michael now found himself caught in a dangerous web of expectations. His professors expected more, his peers expected more, and, most of all, he expected more. In the classroom, his contributions were becoming almost routine. His answers were no longer met with surprise or skepticism. Instead, there was an air of inevitability about his presence: Michael Hayes, the student who always had an answer. But with this recognition came the pressure to never falter. Each time Michael raised his hand, he felt like the room was holding its breath, waiting for him to confirm the image they had built of him. One afternoon, as he sat in the university's dining hall, Michael felt the weight of it all. He was eating alone, a habit he had grown accustomed to since arriving at Princeton. His classmates often sat in groups, laughing and discussing the latest campus gossip, but Michael remained on the outskirts. It was easier this way, he told himself. Easier than dealing with the expectations and the occasional judgmental glance. But that didn't stop the loneliness from creeping in. As he was eating, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah Brooks: "I've been watching you work. You're doing great, Michael. Don't forget to take a break once in a while. I know you're pushing yourself hard, but remember, you're more than your grades." Michael's thumb hovered over the screen for a moment. The words were kind, but they didn't completely sink in. He had been working tirelessly for so long that he couldn't remember what it was like to take a step back. His life had become a series of exams, assignments, and late-night study sessions. There wasn't time for anything else. He wasn't sure if he even remembered what it felt like to have fun anymore. After a few moments, he typed a quick response: thanks, I'll try to keep that in mind. He didn't believe it, though. He wasn't sure he could take a break. A few days later, Michael was walking to class when he spotted David Whitaker from across the quad. David was standing with a group of students, his usual entourage of followers hanging on his every word. David's eyes flicked toward Michael, and for a moment, their gazes met. There was a flicker of something in David's expression, an unreadable glance that Michael couldn't quite place. David nodded at him, his smile sharp. "Hey, Hayes," he called out. Michael hesitated but then walked over, his footsteps purposeful. "What's up?" Michael asked, keeping his tone neutral. David gave him a once-over, as if appraising him. "I heard you were on top of your game these days. Thermodynamics, relativity, you're making a name for yourself." He paused. "But let me ask you something, Michael, how long can you keep this up?" Michael frowned, his nerves flaring at the challenge hidden in David's words. "What do you mean?" David leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "I mean, it's one thing to be good for a few weeks, but what happens when you run out of steam? When the tests get harder and the professors start expecting more from you? You think you can keep up this pace? Everyone thinks you're going to burn out." Michael clenched his jaw. "You don't know anything about me." David shrugged, the smirk on his face widening. "Maybe not. But I've seen it before. People like you, thinking they have something to prove. They push too hard, too fast, and they end up breaking under the pressure." Michael felt a wave of irritation rise up within him, but he held it back. He knew David was trying to provoke him. He wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Still, the seed of doubt David had planted began to grow in Michael's mind. Could he keep this up? It was an unsettling thought. He had been pushing himself for so long that he had never once stopped to ask himself what his limits were. He had convinced himself that the only way forward was through relentless effort. But now, David's words echoed in his head, "What happens when you run out of steam?" That night, Michael sat in his dorm room, his textbook spread out before him. But he couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting back to David's words. He glanced at the clock, nearly 2 a.m. He hadn't realized how late it had gotten. Maybe I need to stop for a minute. Michael thought. But what if I fall behind? What if I lose my edge? The conflicting thoughts swirled in his head. But as exhaustion crept over him, he realized he couldn't ignore the fact that he had been running on empty for far too long. Finally, he closed his books, leaned back in his chair, and stared at the ceiling. It felt strange to do nothing, to let his thoughts wander instead of being consumed by academic pressure. But in that moment, something shifted. Maybe David was right. Maybe it was time to take a step back. The next day, Michael went for a walk around campus, his mind still tangled with the weight of his choices. The sun was shining, and there was a crispness in the air that signaled the approach of winter. Michael had spent so much time buried in books that he had forgotten how beautiful the campus was. As he walked, he spotted Sarah Brooks sitting on a bench outside, reading a book. He felt a strange sense of comfort seeing her there. "Hey," Michael greeted her, taking a seat beside her on the bench. Sarah smiled up at him, her eyes bright. "Hey, Michael. How's it going?" Michael hesitated. "Honestly, I'm struggling. I've been pushing myself so hard, I'm starting to wonder if I'm going to burn out. Everyone expects so much from me now." Sarah set her book aside and looked at him thoughtfully. "It's okay to admit that it's hard. No one can do everything on their own all the time. You're only human, Michael." Her words settled over him, gentle but firm. Michael nodded, taking a deep breath. He had been so focused on proving himself to others that he had lost sight of what really mattered, his well-being. "Maybe you're right," he said quietly. "Maybe I need to slow down a little." Sarah smiled, her eyes filled with understanding. "It's not about slowing down permanently. It's about finding a pace that works for you. You don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders all the time. That night, Michael made a decision. He would take a break. He would step away from the pressure, just for a moment, and focus on what he truly wanted. It was scary, uncertain, but he couldn't ignore the growing need for balance. He had spent so long trying to prove himself to others, but now, for the first time, he realized that he needed to prove something to himself, to allow himself space to breathe, to reflect, and to grow. The next morning, he didn't head straight to the library as usual. Instead, he joined some of his classmates for a coffee at the campus cafe. It felt unfamiliar but freeing. As he sat with friends, laughing and talking about trivial things, he felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. He didn't have to be perfect all the time. And for the first time since arriving at Princeton, Michael allowed himself to simply be. The following week brought a subtle shift in Michael's routine. He had promised himself to slow down, to take a breath, and to find a rhythm that allowed for both work and rest. He kept his word, but in the back of his mind, the nagging feeling of looming expectations continued to lurk. Michael's decision to allow himself moments of respite hadn't been easy. Each time he stepped away from his studies to grab a coffee with Sarah, or took an evening to relax with some music, he felt the whispers of doubt creeping in. Was he falling behind? Was everyone else passing him by while he focused on taking care of himself? But with each passing day, the balance began to feel less like a compromise and more like a necessity. The world wouldn't fall apart if he took a step back now and then. In fact, it might just make him stronger in the long run. It was on a crisp Thursday afternoon that the breakthrough happened. Michael had just finished his lecture on quantum mechanics, and his mind was buzzing with the complexities of wave-particle duality and Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. He was walking through the university's central courtyard, feeling the weight of the past few days' realizations settle within him. It wasn't that he had suddenly become complacent, far from it. It was just that he had learned the invaluable lesson that constant pressure wasn't the key to success. The true path forward involved a balance between ambition and self-respect. As Michael walked, his phone buzzed again, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from Professor Whitaker. Michael had not expected to hear from him, especially after the strained conversation they had weeks ago. The message read: Mr. Hayes, I'm hosting a seminar on the future of artificial intelligence in modern physics this Saturday. I'd like you to present your ideas on the topic during the event. You've shown promise, and I believe this could be a valuable opportunity for you. Michael stared at the phone, his heart racing. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The opportunity to prove himself on a larger stage, to showcase everything he had worked for. But the fear and self-doubt from his earlier conversations with David and Sarah immediately resurfaced. Was he ready? The question lingered in his mind. He had spent years dreaming of moments like this, but now that it was within reach, a sense of panic gripped him. The imposter syndrome that had quietly hovered over him since arriving at Princeton suddenly felt much louder. On Friday evening, as the seminar loomed closer, Michael found himself pacing in his dorm room. His presentation was prepared, his notes were meticulously organized, but the confidence he needed seemed just out of reach. The pressure felt more suffocating than ever. He texted Sarah, I don't know if I can do this. What if I mess up? What if they think I don't belong here? Sarah's reply came almost instantly, you do belong there, Michael. You've earned this opportunity. Don't let the fear of failure stop you from stepping into your potential. They'll see that you belong. Now it's time to show you that you do. Her words rang in his ears as he put his phone down and took a deep breath. She's right. It wasn't about proving something to anyone else anymore. It was about proving it to himself. As Michael sat at his desk, he looked at the mirror hanging on the wall. He saw the reflection of a young man who had fought through doubts, struggled with loneliness, and pushed beyond his limits. But this was the moment where he would finally take that leap, not to impress anyone else, but because he knew he had earned it. Saturday arrived, and with it came a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. The seminar was being held in a large lecture hall, one of those intimidating spaces where the air always felt a little thicker, the pressure a little heavier. Michael stood outside the door for a moment, staring at the group of students and professors already gathered inside. It wasn't just the professors who intimidated him now, it was his peers, those who had once doubted him but were now expecting him to deliver. Taking one final breath, Michael stepped through the door. Inside, Professor Whitaker stood at the front of the room, his arms folded as he looked over a group of students seated at the table. As Michael entered, he gave a brief nod of recognition, but it was the eyes of the students that made his heart race. David Whitaker, who had grown into a quiet rival, was sitting at the front, staring at Michael with an expression that was both curious and slightly dismissive. Michael knew that this seminar wasn't just about presenting his ideas, it was about showing David, and everyone else, that he belonged. That he could match the intellectual weight of this room. The room fell silent as Professor Whitaker gestured for Michael to begin. Michael walked up to the front, his hands a little shaky but his mind sharp. He began to speak, outlining his ideas on the future of artificial intelligence in physics. At first, his voice was steady but unsure, but as he continued, he felt the familiar rush of confidence returning. His ideas were strong. He had researched tirelessly, thinking critically about how AI could shape scientific progress. He spoke with clarity, his passion for the subject breaking through the walls of doubt that had once held him back. He noticed a few nodding heads in the audience, the skeptical expressions softening with every passing minute. Michael's mind raced, but in the best possible way. The questions he had prepared for, those tough, sharp inquiries that often left students stammering, came, but they were no longer a source of fear. Each question Michael answered with poise, his confidence growing with every response. And then came the most important moment. David raised his hand. Michael had been expecting this. David had always been someone who relished the opportunity to challenge others, to expose flaws in their reasoning. It wasn't malicious, but it was certainly intimidating. As Michael turned to face him, David's eyes glinted with that familiar sharpness. "So, Michael," David began, his tone as cool as ever, "you're suggesting that artificial intelligence could not only aid in theoretical physics but also have a direct role in the future of quantum computing. But you've neglected to address the ethical implications of AI in scientific discovery. How do you reconcile the potential dangers of AI with the responsibility we have as scientists to ensure we're not creating something uncontrollable?" Michael took a moment to gather his thoughts. This was the kind of question that could easily derail a presentation. It was designed to put him on the defensive, to show he hadn't thought everything through. But instead of feeling flustered, Michael met David's gaze with calm resolve. "You're right, David," Michael said, his voice steady, "the ethical implications are huge. And that's exactly why we need to begin addressing these concerns now, in tandem with technological development. AI can only help us if we build it responsibly. If we fail to consider the ethical aspects, we risk losing control of something that could fundamentally alter our understanding of the universe. But as scientists, we have the power to guide that development, to ensure it's used responsibly." David's eyebrows rose in surprise, and Michael could see a flicker of respect pass through his expression. The room seemed to quiet even more. Professor Whitaker nodded thoughtfully. "Well said, Michael. Very well said." As the seminar drew to a close, Michael felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had done it. Not only had he answered every question with poise, but he had also earned the respect of his peers, and perhaps even David Whitaker. When the seminar finally ended, and Michael stood at the back of the room gathering his notes, Sarah appeared by his side. "You did it, didn't you?" she asked, a knowing smile on her face. Michael's chest swelled with pride, the nervousness that had gripped him earlier now replaced with a quiet confidence. "I think I did." The days following Michael's presentation at the seminar were a blur. The sense of accomplishment he felt after the event lingered, but it was soon overshadowed by something unexpected. It was almost as though the universe was giving him a taste of success, only to turn the tables once again. It all began on Monday morning when Michael walked into the physics department for his scheduled meeting with Professor Whitaker. As he entered, the professor's office door was ajar, and Michael stepped in to find Professor Whitaker sitting behind his desk, looking unusually serious. The room was filled with thick books and stacks of research papers, the typical chaos of a highly respected academic. "Good morning, Michael," Professor Whitaker said, his voice calm but tinged with an underlying tension. "Please, sit down." Michael nodded, taking a seat across from him. He wasn't sure what to expect, but the change in Whitaker's demeanor made him uneasy. "I've been reviewing your performance lately," Professor Whitaker began, folding his hands on the desk. "And I must say, your seminar presentation was impressive. I didn't expect you to handle the questions quite so well, especially from Mr. Whitaker." Michael blinked. "David Whitaker?" Professor Whitaker gave a slight nod. "Yes. As you know, he's one of the top students here. So, his opinion carries weight. And yours, Mr. Hayes, is rapidly gaining attention." Michael could feel the weight of those words. Rapidly gaining attention. He'd worked so hard for this moment, for people to finally take him seriously, but now he wasn't sure if he wanted this kind of attention. Professor Whitaker's voice cut through his thoughts. "That said, I have an opportunity I'd like you to consider." Michael's stomach twisted. He could feel something shifting in the air, like a storm was coming. "What kind of opportunity?" Professor Whitaker leaned forward slightly, his gaze sharp. "I've been in contact with a research team at the National Institute for Advanced Research. They're looking for someone with your particular skill set, a student who can bridge the gap between theoretical physics and artificial intelligence. I've already recommended you for the position." Michael was taken aback. This was a major opportunity. The kind of breakthrough that could set the course for his entire career. But before he could even let himself get excited, another thought crept into his mind: David Whitaker. The same person who had seemed so dismissive of Michael, who had raised such tough questions during the seminar, now appeared to be involved in this opportunity. What if David was the one truly favored for the position? What if his own accomplishments, no matter how well he had presented, weren't enough? Michael hesitated. "That sounds incredible, but, is this what you really want from me? I've been thinking about my path lately, and I don't want to rush into something without considering all the consequences." Professor Whitaker raised an eyebrow. "You're being cautious, I see. That's good. But this could be the kind of project that defines your future. A chance to make a real impact. I suggest you take it seriously, Michael." Before Michael could respond, the door to the office opened, and David Whitaker entered the room, wearing his usual sharp suit and an air of quiet confidence. His eyes flicked briefly to Michael, and for the first time, Michael could see a hint of something more, perhaps recognition, or a challenge. "Professor Whitaker," David greeted, his voice smooth and controlled. "Michael, good to see you." Michael stood, instinctively stiffening, unsure of what to make of this new dynamic. David Whitaker, the rival and the person who had made it clear that Michael was an outsider, was now in the same room, a part of this conversation. Professor Whitaker smiled at David. "Ah, David, you've arrived just in time. I was telling Michael about the research opportunity at the National Institute for Advanced Research. I think it would be an excellent fit for him, don't you agree?" David's expression remained neutral, but Michael noticed the slight flicker in his eyes. "Yes, Professor. It's a fantastic opportunity. I believe it would benefit Michael's development as a physicist. But I do think he'll have a hard time keeping up with the rest of us." His voice was almost too smooth, too careful, as if he was daring Michael to rise to the challenge. Michael could feel the tension between them now, thick and palpable. David had already made his feelings clear: this was a contest. He wasn't just helping Michael, he was ensuring he understood that this was a battle for the top spot. Michael could feel his heart race, the competitive fire igniting within him once again. Professor Whitaker, sensing the rising tension, interjected. I believe this is exactly why Michael is so well suited for this position. It's not just about intellect, it's about resilience, adaptability. This project will demand the best of you, Michael. The words hung in the air, and Michael understood their weight. This wasn't about proving he belonged, it was about showing that he could stand tall in the face of competition, even from someone as formidable as David. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur, and as Michael left Professor Whitaker's office, the weight of the decision ahead of him settled in his chest. The opportunity was there, yes. But the stakes had been raised, and now he was no longer just competing against himself, he was competing against David, the one person who had shown him the harshest sides of academia. The rest of the day was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one more overwhelming than the last. As much as he wanted to take the research opportunity and prove himself, he also had doubts. Was he truly ready for this, or was he rushing into something just to keep up with David and everyone else? Later that night, he found himself once again sitting with Sarah in their usual spot at the cafe. "You look like you've got a lot on your mind," Sarah observed, looking at him over her coffee cup. Michael sighed deeply. "I've been offered this incredible research opportunity. It could change everything for me. But the pressure is unreal. David Whitaker is involved, and I feel like he's going to make this a competition. He's always been that way. I'm not sure if I'm ready for that." Sarah's eyes softened, and she leaned forward, placing a comforting hand on his. "Michael, I know how hard you've worked for this. But you don't need to prove anything to anyone. Take the opportunity if it feels right for you, but remember that it's not about beating David or anyone else. It's about what you want out of your future. You're capable of so much more than you give yourself credit for." Her words resonated with him in a way that no one else's had before. She wasn't trying to tell him what to do, she was simply reminding him to listen to his own heart, to trust himself. For the first time that day, Michael felt the clarity he had been seeking. The opportunity wasn't just about the challenge, it was about the journey he wanted to take. He knew it was time to stop running from competition and instead face it head-on, on his own terms. He just hoped he was truly ready. Michael spent the next few days in a haze of uncertainty. The decision to accept the research opportunity at the National Institute for Advanced Research weighed heavily on his mind. Each time he thought about it, his stomach twisted. The lure of a prestigious position, the chance to work on groundbreaking physics with the best minds in the field, was almost irresistible. Yet, the presence of David Whitaker, the unspoken rivalry between them, made the prospect feel like a high-stakes game he wasn't sure he was ready to play. At times, the idea of distancing himself from the competition seemed more appealing. Maybe he could pursue something smaller, something that wouldn't demand so much of his personal identity. But every time he considered that option, he would hear Sarah's voice in his head, "It's not about beating anyone, Michael. It's about what you want." He kept replaying her words, but the pressure still felt overwhelming. One late afternoon, as Michael sat on the steps outside his dormitory, staring at the pages of his notes in a futile attempt to focus, he was interrupted by the familiar sound of footsteps. He looked up and saw David Whitaker walking toward him, an unexpected presence that made Michael's pulse quicken. David had a way of appearing just when Michael was trying to sort through his thoughts, as if he had an uncanny ability to sense his weaknesses. "Mind if I join you?" David asked, his tone casual yet unmistakably deliberate. Michael hesitated, but then nodded, feeling an inexplicable tension rise between them. "Sure, go ahead." David sat down next to him, not wasting any time. "I've been thinking about the research opportunity," he said, his voice unusually soft. "You're probably still deciding, right?" Michael swallowed, unsure of how to respond. "So, he knows I'm undecided." "Yeah, I'm still not sure," Michael admitted. "It's a huge decision, and I don't know if I'm ready for it." David tilted his head, looking at Michael with an unreadable expression. "You're ready, Michael. I know you're questioning it, but think about it. This is a huge chance, and I wouldn't want you to pass it up just because you're worried about the competition. You've got what it takes. Don't sell yourself short." Michael turned to face David, surprised by his sincerity. For the first time, he noticed a hint of something that didn't feel like rivalry, something closer to respect. It was a rare moment, and Michael wasn't sure how to respond to it. Michael started, but then stopped. He didn't know if he could express what he was feeling. What if David was right? What if his hesitation wasn't about the challenge, but about his fear of stepping into his own potential? David continued, his gaze intense. You've been holding back. I can tell. There's something you're afraid to face, and I think it's yourself. You've been trying to make yourself fit into everyone else's expectations. But this is your time. If you want to stand out in this field, you have to make decisions that are yours. Forget the competition, Michael. If you accept this opportunity, it's because you want to, not because anyone else thinks you should. Michael felt a rush of conflicting emotions, part frustration, part clarity. Here was David, someone he had seen as an opponent at every turn, now telling him to follow his own path. But there was something more to it. The pressure had been building for so long, and now, all of a sudden, Michael wasn't just questioning the opportunity in front of him, he was questioning why he was constantly looking over his shoulder at others. The truth was, Michael was not just afraid of the challenge, he was afraid of his own potential, of stepping into something greater than himself. Later that night, Michael sat at his desk, staring out the window at the campus lights below. His mind replayed the conversation with David over and over. It felt like a challenge wrapped in advice, a challenge to see if Michael was willing to embrace who he was, not just as a student, but as a person with his own worth. He needed to make a decision. He had been given the chance to prove himself, but he was the one who had to accept it. He had the ability, the drive, and the intelligence. What he lacked was the belief that he deserved it. That had to change. The following morning, Michael woke early and decided he would no longer put off the decision. He dressed quickly, grabbed his bag, and headed straight for Professor Whitaker's office. When he arrived, the door was open, and Professor Whitaker was at his desk, reviewing research papers. He looked up as Michael entered, his usual calm expression in place. "Well, Michael, have you had some time to think?" Professor Whitaker asked, his tone gentle but with an undertone of anticipation. Michael took a deep breath. He was ready. "I've made my decision," he said, looking Professor Whitaker in the eyes. "I accept the research opportunity." Professor Whitaker's eyes brightened. "Excellent choice. You won't regret it." Michael's heart raced as he spoke again, this time with more confidence. "Thank you for the recommendation, Professor. I won't let you down." That evening, after the decision had been made, Michael felt a weight lift from his shoulders. There was no more hesitation, no more second-guessing. He had taken the step, and now, he was going to see it through. He walked over to Sarah's dorm later that night to tell her the news. As soon as he saw her face, he couldn't help but smile. "I did it," he said, grinning ear to ear. "I took the opportunity. I'm going for it." Sarah's eyes lit up with pride. "I knew you would. You've been ready for this, Michael. This is your moment." The words echoed in his mind, "This is your moment." For the first time, he felt like he was truly stepping into his own. The next day, Michael stood in front of the lecture hall at the National Institute for Advanced Research, ready for his first day in the program. The room was filled with some of the brightest minds in the field. Michael felt a rush of excitement mixed with anxiety, but this time, he didn't let the fear control him. He had already made the hardest decision, now it was time to prove to himself that he could live up to his potential. As he walked into the room, he saw David Whitaker standing at the front, talking to one of the senior researchers. Michael's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The challenge had officially begun. But as he stepped into the room, he didn't feel fear. He felt alive. The first day at the National Institute for Advanced Research was everything Michael had expected and more. The institute was located on the outskirts of the city, a sprawling complex of sleek, modern buildings that housed some of the brightest minds in scientific research. As he walked through the main entrance, he could already feel the weight of history pressing against his shoulders. This place was the future of physics, and now, he was a part of it. Michael had always dreamt of working in an environment like this, surrounded by innovation, breakthrough ideas, and people who lived and breathed the same passion he did. But nothing had prepared him for the overwhelming sense of imposter syndrome that crept in as he sat at his assigned desk, looking around at the other researchers. They were already deep in conversation about theoretical models and AI applications in quantum computing, speaking a language that felt foreign to Michael. "First day," a voice asked, cutting through his thoughts. Michael looked up to see Dr. Linda Morgan, a senior researcher with short-cropped hair and an intense gaze. She was one of the leading figures in the AI division of the Institute, known for her groundbreaking work in machine learning. "Yeah," Michael replied, trying to sound confident. "I'm just getting settled in." Dr. Morgan smiled knowingly. "Don't worry, you'll get the hang of it. We all felt out of place when we first arrived. But if you want to succeed here, you've got to dive in head first. The ideas we work on here change the world. It's fast-paced, but that's why it's exciting." Michael nodded, feeling a sense of determination build within him. "I belong here. I can do this." As the day went on, Michael was introduced to the team and assigned his first project, helping to refine a new AI model that could predict quantum entanglement with unprecedented accuracy. He had never worked with AI at this level before, but the challenge only excited him more. This was his chance to prove himself, not just to others, but to himself. He dove into the work, staying late into the evening, fueled by the excitement of the project and the sense that he was finally on the right path. However, as the days passed, he started to notice something that made him uneasy. David Whittaker was everywhere. David had been assigned to a similar project in the department, and every time Michael turned around, he seemed to be there, offering his own suggestions, correcting minor errors, and, most unsettlingly, constantly looking over Michael's shoulder. It was subtle at first, just a glance here, a raised eyebrow there. But soon, it became clear, David was not just another colleague. He was watching Michael, scrutinizing his every move, almost as if he was waiting for him to make a mistake. One afternoon, Michael was working on an AI algorithm to enhance the model's accuracy, when David walked by his desk. "How's it going?" David asked, leaning over Michael's shoulder. Michael tensed. "It's going well. I think I'm making some progress." David smiled, a little too smugly. "I'm sure you are. Just remember, this isn't just about the math, Michael. You've got to think bigger. Look at the bigger picture, where the data is going, what the implications are. Otherwise, you'll miss the forest for the trees." Michael's stomach twisted. It was the same patronizing tone David had used when they had first met, as if he were trying to remind Michael that he wasn't on David's level. Michael tried to push the comment aside, but it lingered in his mind. That evening, as Michael sat in his apartment, staring at his computer screen, he couldn't help but feel the pressure building. He had been given a chance to prove himself, but every time he made progress, it felt like David was right there, casting a shadow over him. He didn't want to let the feeling of competition derail his work, but it was hard to ignore. It wasn't just that David was smarter, Michael knew he had the ability to hold his own. It was the way David subtly undermined him, always making Michael feel like he was one step behind. He needed to get away from it all for a moment, to clear his head. He grabbed his jacket and walked out of his apartment. The night air was cool, and the city lights stretched out before him like a sea of possibility. Michael needed to refocus, to remind himself of why he was here in the first place, to push the boundaries of knowledge, not to compete with someone else. The next morning, Michael made a conscious decision. He would stop comparing himself to David. David wasn't the measure of his success. The only person who could define his limits was himself. And he had proven time and again that he could rise above any challenge. That morning, he approached Dr. Morgan and asked for her feedback on his work. She had been one of the few people who had given him encouragement when he first arrived, and he trusted her opinion. "Dr. Morgan, could you take a look at my progress on the quantum entanglement model? I think I'm on the right track, but I'd appreciate your insights." Dr. Morgan looked over the code, her expression unreadable. After a long moment, she spoke. "This is good, Michael. But you're overcomplicating things. The elegance of the model is getting lost in all the details. You need to take a step back and simplify it. Sometimes the most powerful solutions are the ones that seem too simple at first glance." Michael blinked, feeling a sense of clarity wash over him. Simplicity. That's it. As he revised his approach, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The algorithm was starting to function exactly as he had envisioned. Michael felt a sense of pride as he watched the model work flawlessly for the first time. It wasn't just about the technical aspects anymore, it was about the elegance of the solution, the beauty of the process. Later that afternoon, David appeared once again at Michael's desk. He glanced at the screen, and for the first time, Michael saw something different in David's eyes, a recognition, a flicker of respect. "Not bad," David said, his tone a little more neutral than usual. "You figured it out." Michael straightened in his chair. "I did. Thanks for the feedback," he said, his voice steady. David gave him a small nod and walked away without another word. That evening, Michael felt a rush of accomplishment. It wasn't about beating David. It was about proving to himself that he was more than capable of achieving greatness on his own. He had faced the pressure, the doubts, and the constant competition, and he had come out the other side stronger. As he sat at his desk, reviewing his progress, he realized that this was just the beginning. The world of research was vast and full of challenges, but it was also full of opportunities. Michael had the potential to shape the future of physics, and he was finally starting to believe it. Tomorrow, he would push further. And this time, he would do it on his own terms. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The following weeks were a blur for Michael. The atmosphere at the National Institute for Advanced Research was one of relentless pace. Every day seemed to present a new challenge, a new problem to solve, or a new concept to master. But as he navigated through the whirlwind of technical hurdles and intellectual debates, one thing became glaringly clear: David Whittaker was never far from his side. It wasn't just the constant technical feedback or the subtly dismissive comments. There was something more, a palpable sense of rivalry that made Michael feel like he was always being watched, as if David was waiting for him to slip up. Michael had always known there was competition in academia. But this was different. It was personal. One afternoon, Michael found himself alone in the lab, working late into the evening, as he often did. The soft hum of computers and the faint clicking of keys were the only sounds filling the air. He had finally cracked the code he'd been struggling with for days, and the satisfaction of seeing his model work perfectly made the late nights feel worth it. As he stared at the screen, he felt a sense of accomplishment, a feeling that had eluded him for so long. Just as he leaned back in his chair, feeling a momentary wave of pride, the door to the lab creaked open. Michael didn't need to look up. He knew who it was. "David. How's it going?" David's voice was casual, but Michael could sense the underlying challenge. There was something in the way David spoke, something that made Michael feel like he was being measured at every moment. "It's going well," Michael replied, trying to sound composed. "I think I've made some real progress." David walked over and glanced at Michael's screen. His eyes scanned the model quickly, then turned back to Michael with a look that seemed almost too deliberate. "It's good," David said, his tone nonchalant. "But it's a bit complicated. You might want to simplify it." Michael clenched his jaw. "Not again. Always with the simplifying. Does he think I don't know that?" "I've considered that," Michael said, doing his best to remain calm. But I think this approach is the right one. It's not just about simplicity, it's about accuracy. David raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Sure, but sometimes overcomplicating things just makes them harder to replicate. You know that, right? Michael's frustration bubbled up, but he swallowed it. This was the pattern, David's subtle way of asserting dominance. Michael had been here before, in this exact situation, but now, something felt different. I'll take another look, Michael said stiffly, unwilling to engage in the back-and-forth. Thanks for the input. David's smile didn't reach his eyes. No problem, he said, turning to leave. As he reached the door, he paused, glancing over his shoulder one last time. You know, I've been thinking about the final presentation. You'll want to make sure your model is in top shape by then. If you need help with anything, you know where to find me. Michael nodded curtly. He didn't need David's help. What he needed was the space to prove to himself that he could do this, on his own terms. Later that night, Michael found himself staring at the same model, unsure whether David's criticism had any merit. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that the model wasn't just technically complicated, it was his. It was a representation of his ideas, his approach to the problem. And no one, not even David, could take that away from him. He decided to take a risk. He wasn't going to simplify the model just to fit someone else's expectations. Instead, he would refine it, making sure it worked the way he believed it should. And if the results were groundbreaking, he would prove to everyone, including David, that he was capable of handling the pressure. The days that followed were a blur of late nights and caffeine-fueled mornings. Michael refined his model, adjusting the algorithm, tweaking the parameters, and running endless simulations. Each time it worked, he felt a surge of pride. He was making progress, and it was his progress, not anyone else's. But as the final presentation day approached, the pressure began to build once again. The institute's elite professors would be judging the models, and Michael couldn't shake the feeling that David was determined to overshadow him. As much as he tried to block out the rivalry, it had become an ever-present cloud hanging over him. Finally, the day of the presentation arrived. The conference room was filled with a buzz of excited chatter as researchers, professors, and students filtered in, each presenting their work on the most recent advancements in quantum computing and AI. The atmosphere was electric, with the promise of new ideas and discoveries hanging in the air. Michael stood at the back of the room, his palms sweating as he adjusted his tie. He hadn't expected to feel this nervous, but as he looked around at the other presenters, many of whom were far more experienced than he was, doubt crept in. Was his work ready? Would it measure up? Or was he about to embarrass himself in front of some of the most brilliant minds in the field? Just then, Dr. Morgan walked past, offering a reassuring smile. "You've got this, Michael," she said, her voice calm and confident. "Remember, it's not about perfection. It's about sharing your ideas. The rest will follow." Her words helped center him, but still, he felt the weight of the moment. The presentation began, and Michael took his place in front of the room, setting up his laptop. He could see David sitting toward the front, watching him intently. For a moment, Michael's nerves flared up, but then he remembered Dr. Morgan's advice. "It's about sharing my ideas." With that in mind, he took a deep breath and began. "Good afternoon, everyone," Michael started, his voice steady but low. "Today, I'll be presenting my work on refining AI models for predicting quantum entanglement." He launched into his presentation, outlining his methodology, the technical challenges, and the breakthroughs he had achieved with his model. As he spoke, he could feel his confidence growing. The more he explained, the more he realized that his work had value, even if it wasn't as simplified as some might have liked. It was his vision, his solution, and that was enough. As the presentation concluded, Michael felt a sense of relief wash over him. The hardest part was over, and now it was just a matter of waiting for feedback. He glanced at the audience, and for a brief moment, his eyes met David's. To his surprise, David wasn't scowling or giving him a knowing look. Instead, David's expression seemed thoughtful. The professors began their evaluations, offering critiques and asking questions. Michael responded with clarity and confidence, and as the feedback continued, he could see their respect for his work growing. When it was over, Michael gathered his things and left the room, his heart pounding. He had done it. He had put himself out there, and he had held his ground. Later that day, Michael received an email from Dr. Morgan with the subject line, "Feedback on presentation." He opened it eagerly. "Great job, Michael. You showed great initiative, and your model demonstrated innovative thinking. However, keep in mind that simplicity is key. There's always room for refinement. But overall, you're on the right track. Keep pushing forward." Her words were validating. But what stood out most was this: "You're on the right track." Michael smiled, feeling the weight of self-doubt lift from his shoulders. He had taken a risk, trusted his instincts, and come out the other side stronger. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The days following the presentation passed in a blur for Michael. He had expected to feel a sense of relief after presenting his work at the National Institute for Advanced Research, but instead, he found himself consumed by a strange mixture of pride and unease. His model had been well received by the professors and researchers, but there was something else he couldn't shake, a sense that there were forces at play behind the scenes, forces that he hadn't yet fully understood. The feeling started as a whisper, a subtle discomfort that lingered in his mind every time David's name came up in conversation. It wasn't just about the competition. It wasn't just the rivalry. Michael had begun to notice patterns, small but undeniable, that made him question whether his success had truly been his own or whether someone else had a hand in shaping it. One afternoon, as Michael was reviewing some of his notes on a new AI project, he received an unexpected email. The subject line read, "Confidential, invitation to collaborate." Intrigued, he opened it to find a message from Dr. Daniel Carter, one of the leading professors at the Institute and a well-respected figure in the field of quantum computing. "Dear Michael, I've been following your recent work, and I believe there may be an opportunity for us to collaborate. I am starting a new research initiative focused on the intersection of AI and quantum mechanics, and your model could be a critical component. I'd like to discuss the details with you in person. Please let me know if you're interested. Best regards. Dr. Daniel Carter." Michael sat back in his chair, stunned. This was a big deal. Dr. Carter was one of the most influential figures at the Institute. To be invited into one of his projects was a recognition of his skills, but it also raised a few questions. Why had Dr. Carter reached out to him? Was it because of his recent presentation, or was there another reason? He couldn't help but wonder if David had something to do with it. After all, David had been heavily involved in similar projects and had close ties with Dr. Carter. The next morning, Michael found himself walking into Dr. Carter's office, a feeling of anticipation building in his chest. The office was as immaculate and polished as the man himself, bookshelves lined with academic journals, a pristine desk covered in neatly organized papers, and a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a breathtaking view of the city below. "Michael, good to see you," Dr. Carter greeted him, standing up from behind his desk. "Please, have a seat." Michael sat down, trying to keep his nerves in check. Dr. Carter's reputation preceded him. He was known for being both brilliant and demanding, a man who pushed his students to their absolute limits. "I've been following your progress with great interest," Dr. Carter continued, settling back into his chair. "Your approach to the quantum entanglement model is unconventional, but that's what caught my eye. You're thinking outside the box, and that's exactly what we need for this project." Michael nodded, his mind racing. "Thank you. I'm honored by your interest. But I have to ask, what exactly would this collaboration entail?" Dr. Carter leaned forward, his fingers steepled together. "I'm assembling a team of researchers to tackle some of the biggest questions in quantum computing, particularly in how AI can enhance our understanding of entanglement and quantum information processing. Your model has potential, but we need someone with your perspective to help us refine it." This is a chance to make a real impact in the field. Michael's heart raced. This was everything he had been working toward. But there was something about Dr. Carter's words that seemed rehearsed. He couldn't quite place it, but something about the way the professor spoke made Michael feel like he was being sold on an idea, rather than invited to collaborate. I appreciate the opportunity, Michael said slowly. But I want to make sure that my role in this is clear. I've spent a lot of time developing my model, and I want to ensure that it's respected and incorporated properly. Dr. Carter smiled, his expression smooth and confident. Of course, Michael. You'll be a key part of the team. Your work will be integral to the success of the project. But as with any collaboration, there will be adjustments. The goal is to refine your model and make it fit into a broader framework of research. Michael's instincts told him to be cautious, but the lure of this opportunity was hard to resist. I'll think about it and let you know, he said, standing up to leave. Take your time, Dr. Carter said with a knowing smile. But I think you'll find that this is an offer you won't want to pass up. As Michael left Dr. Carter's office, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being manipulated, even if he didn't fully understand how. The offer was tempting, too tempting. He had spent so much time trying to prove his worth at the institute, and now, here was a chance to make a name for himself. But there was a lingering question: was he being pulled into something bigger than he could control? Over the next few days, Michael couldn't stop thinking about the offer. He spent hours talking it over with Dr. Morgan, who had become a trusted mentor. She had always been candid with him, offering advice when he needed it and pushing him when he got too comfortable. Michael, I can see why this offer is appealing, Dr. Morgan said one afternoon as they sat in a quiet corner of the Institute's cafe. Dr. Carter's projects are prestigious, and the recognition that comes with working alongside him is undeniable. But don't lose sight of what you're trying to accomplish. It's your model, your work. Are you prepared to let someone else take the lead on it? Michael hesitated. I don't know. I mean, it's a huge opportunity, but I also don't want to lose control of what I've built. Dr. Morgan nodded thoughtfully. That's the key question, isn't it? The world of research is full of these kinds of offers. They can help you grow, but they can also lead you down a path where you're no longer in the driver's seat. Be careful not to lose yourself in the process. As the days wore on, Michael began to notice more subtle signs that his suspicions weren't unfounded. David had started acting strangely around him, acting like a close confidant, offering to help with the project, and even subtly praising his work in front of others. It was as if he was trying to position himself as Michael's ally, but there was a calculated quality to his actions that Michael couldn't ignore. One evening, Michael ran into David in the hallway. Hey, Michael, David said, his tone casual but with a hint of something more. I heard you're thinking about working with Dr. Carter. That's a big move. I've worked with him on a few projects before. He's a good guy, but you'll want to watch your back. He's a master at using people's ideas to get ahead. Michael stopped in his tracks, taken aback by the unexpected comment. What do you mean by that? David shrugged, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Let's just say, you should be careful who you trust in this place. Not everyone has your best interests at heart. Michael felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't know if he could trust David's words, but something about the way he said it rang true. There was more going on here than he realized. Later that night, as Michael lay in bed, the weight of the decisions ahead pressed down on him. He had worked so hard to get here. But now, he was caught in a game he didn't fully understand, a game where the rules were murky and the players had their own hidden agendas. As Michael stared at the ceiling, one thought ran through his mind: how far was he willing to go to succeed? The days following his conversation with David were unsettling for Michael. Every time he walked through the halls of the National Institute for Advanced Research, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. It wasn't just the lingering glances or the subtle whispers between faculty members, it was something more. Something deeper. A tension that seemed to grow with every passing moment, like a storm cloud slowly gathering on the horizon. His thoughts often drifted back to that conversation with David, to the warning about Dr. Carter and the subtle insinuation that his success might be manipulated by forces beyond his control. Michael had always prided himself on his independence, on carving his own path, but now he couldn't help but feel like he was being caught in a web of invisible strings, pulled by forces he didn't fully understand. The evening after their conversation, Michael sat in his apartment, staring at the glowing screen of his laptop. The invitation from Dr. Carter still sat in his inbox, untouched. He had spent hours trying to decide what to do, but the more he thought about it, the more confused he became. On one hand, working with Dr. Carter could be the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to collaborate on groundbreaking research that could define his career. On the other hand, Michael couldn't ignore the feeling that something wasn't right. He had already come so far, and yet, the idea of letting go of control over his work, the work he had poured his heart and soul into, was terrifying. It wasn't just about his model anymore. It was about the future. His future. The following day, Dr. Morgan invited Michael to her office for a private conversation. She could tell something was weighing on his mind, and she had a way of reading him like an open book. Her office, filled with old books and scholarly papers, had always felt like a sanctuary for Michael, a place where he could let his guard down and speak freely. "You look like you've got a lot on your mind," Dr. Morgan observed as Michael took a seat across from her. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm at a crossroads, Dr. Morgan. I've been offered a chance to collaborate with Dr. Carter, but I don't know if it's the right move. David warned me that he has a habit of using people's work to further his own agenda. I don't want to end up as just another cog in his machine." Dr. Morgan leaned back in her chair, studying him thoughtfully. "David's not wrong to be cautious. Dr. Carter has a reputation for being driven. Some people say he's willing to sacrifice others to further his own goals. But that doesn't mean the collaboration is a bad idea. It depends on what you want, Michael. What kind of researcher do you want to be?" Michael's gaze dropped to the desk. He had never been the type to chase after prestige or recognition. But now, with this opportunity in front of him, he was starting to question his own motives. What was it that he really wanted? Fame? Success? Or was it the pursuit of knowledge that had first drawn him to research in the first place? "I want to make a difference," he said quietly, looking up at Dr. Morgan. "I want my work to matter. But I don't want to lose myself in the process." Dr. Morgan nodded. "That's a noble goal. And it's something you'll have to keep in mind as you move forward. But remember, Michael, your work is yours. No one can take that from you unless you let them." After his conversation with Dr. Morgan, Michael felt a sense of clarity, though it didn't resolve everything. He realized that he wasn't just being offered a collaboration with Dr. Carter, he was being asked to make a choice. A choice about the kind of researcher, and the kind of person, he wanted to become. Later that afternoon, Michael made his way back to his lab, still grappling with the decision. His footsteps echoed down the empty hallways as he passed through the building. It was almost too quiet. He had always liked the solitude of the lab, but today, the silence felt oppressive, as though the walls themselves were closing in on him. When he entered the lab, David was already there, hunched over his workstation. The sight of him caused an odd mixture of irritation and anxiety to stir in Michael's chest. Despite the tension that had been building between them, David had never been overtly hostile, at least not to his face. But there was something about the way he worked, the way he tried to get under Michael's skin, that made it hard to trust him completely. "Hey, Michael," David said, not looking up from his screen. "I hear you're thinking about teaming up with Dr. Carter." Michael paused in the doorway, watching him. He had to admit that he wasn't sure if he was ready for another conversation with David. He wasn't sure if he could trust his judgment right now. But the thought of avoiding him seemed even worse. "I've been offered the opportunity," Michael said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "But I'm still deciding. I don't want to make the wrong choice." David finally looked up, his gaze intense. "You're right to be cautious. Carter's not the kind of guy who hands out opportunities just to be nice. He's always looking for something in return. But you knew that already, didn't you? Michael didn't respond immediately. He had been wondering the same thing. Had he been naive in thinking that this collaboration would be purely academic? Or had he been too eager to prove himself, too desperate to make a name for himself, to see the risks involved? David leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. Look, I'm not trying to scare you off, but you need to understand something. Carter will use you if you let him. But if you play your cards right, you can use him too. Just don't get caught in his web. Michael's thoughts raced as he processed David's words. There was a ring of truth to them, but at the same time, something didn't feel right. Was David genuinely looking out for him, or was this just another power play? The next morning, Michael made his decision. He would accept Dr. Carter's offer, but on his own terms. He would be cautious, protective of his work, and above all, he would not let anyone, not even Dr. Carter or David, control his future. He sent a reply to Dr. Carter, expressing his interest in collaborating but also outlining his conditions, clear boundaries, mutual respect, and a guarantee that his work would not be exploited. Then, he waited. The response came quickly. Dr. Carter's email was short and to the point. Michael, I'm glad to hear that you're on board. We'll make sure to discuss the details of the collaboration when we meet. Looking forward to working with you. Michael exhaled deeply. The decision had been made. Now, he just had to navigate the complicated waters of academic politics, trust no one too much, and keep his eyes on the prize. As the days went by, Michael settled into his decision, but the unease never fully left him. He knew he had made the right choice, but the feeling of being caught in a web, of being part of a larger game, remained. The future was uncertain, and the stakes were high. But one thing was for sure, Michael wasn't going to let anyone else dictate his fate. Michael felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him as the days passed, each one making the complexities of his situation more apparent. He had chosen to accept Dr. Carter's offer to collaborate, but now the hard part began, maintaining his autonomy while becoming a part of a high-stakes research project that could change the course of his career. He knew the line he was walking was razor-thin, one wrong move, one misplaced trust, and everything he had worked for could be co-opted by forces beyond his control. The collaboration started with a few introductory meetings with Dr. Carter's team. They were a small group, just 5 or 6 researchers, all highly respected in their respective fields. Michael had been introduced to them at the first meeting, where Dr. Carter had carefully crafted the dynamic, positioning Michael as the newcomer, keen but untested, and subtly making sure everyone knew that his model was a promising, yet unrefined, part of the larger project. Despite his discomfort with the dynamics, Michael worked hard. He made a concerted effort to contribute meaningfully, offering insights into the quantum mechanics that were the basis of his model, showing his ability to think critically and solve problems with unconventional solutions. His work was gaining attention, but with each breakthrough, he felt like something important was slipping further away. His ideas, once independent and free from oversight, were now being funneled into a broader system that was controlled by Dr. Carter. It wasn't long before Michael started to notice subtle shifts in the way the group operated. The more he presented his ideas, the more he saw that Dr. Carter would take credit for them. He would speak with admiration of Michael's contributions but never quite acknowledge where the original ideas had come from. During group discussions, Michael's voice was often drowned out by the louder, more authoritative tones of others. They didn't mean to do it, but slowly, his role was being minimized, his brilliance diluted into the collective efforts of a team that wasn't truly his own. One afternoon, Michael sat alone in the lab, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, reviewing data for the latest research. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Hey, Michael," David said, entering the lab with a casual air, though Michael noticed the glint of something more calculating behind his eyes. "I see you've been busy." Michael looked up, not surprised to see him. It seemed that David had become a regular presence, always lurking nearby, watching closely. The thought of David's cryptic warning earlier weighed on Michael's mind. He had spent the last few weeks working with Dr. Carter's team, and although his name was on the papers and reports, Michael had begun to feel like a small part of a much larger machine, one that was functioning smoothly, but at the expense of his independence. Michael replied, trying to sound nonchalant. Just trying to get a handle on this new phase of the project. David raised an eyebrow. How's it going? You're still finding room to put your own spin on things, right? Or are they swallowing up your ideas? Michael stiffened slightly but forced himself to remain calm. He knew David's comment wasn't innocent. There was always a layer of manipulation underneath his words, like he was testing Michael's resolve. It's fine, Michael said, a little too quickly. I mean, there are a few things I'd like to change, but I think it's going well. David smirked knowingly. You can't let them steal your thunder, Michael. Don't get lost in the noise. They may nod and smile now, but when the real breakthroughs come, they'll make sure to take credit for it. Michael's pulse quickened. David was right. Dr. Carter had already started presenting Michael's work as part of his larger research. But David's insinuations, while unsettling, felt like another game. Was David really concerned about Michael, or was he trying to stir the pot? I'm doing my best to stay focused, Michael responded, trying to steer the conversation away from David's unsettling insinuations. But it's complicated. I'm still figuring out the best way to work within the system. David leaned in, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. Let me tell you something, Michael. Carter doesn't play fair. You need to make sure you're always one step ahead. Be careful who you trust, even if they're offering you opportunities. Michael's thoughts raced, but he didn't let his doubts show. David had always been like this, pessimistic and cynical, constantly warning Michael of dangers that may or may not exist. But there was a sting of truth to what David was saying. The more Michael worked with Dr. Carter's team, the more he realized the stakes of the game they were playing. That night, Michael stayed late in the lab, going over his notes again. His mind wandered back to the moment when he first felt like the work was slipping away from him. It wasn't just about the credit, it was about control. The way Dr. Carter presented his ideas in meetings, subtly pushing Michael into the background, reminded him of something David had once told him about the research world: you either control the narrative, or the narrative controls you. And that was the problem. Dr. Carter was controlling the narrative. Even when Michael contributed a breakthrough idea, it was Carter who stood in front of the team, explaining the findings as if they were his own. Weeks passed, and Michael's internal struggle continued. The more he tried to assert his role in the project, the more he felt like he was running into a brick wall. Dr. Carter's influence only grew stronger. The research had started to attract significant attention within the scientific community, and with that attention came new expectations. The project was no longer just about pushing the boundaries of quantum computing, it was about making a name for Dr. Carter. Michael had become a cog in the machine, and the machine was accelerating faster than he could keep up. One evening, Dr. Carter called Michael into his office for a private meeting. The usual warmth in his tone was replaced by a steely seriousness. Michael, Dr. Carter began, his eyes intense, I want you to understand that the work you're doing here is important. But it's part of something much bigger. We're on the verge of a breakthrough, and there are people watching us. You have to understand that sometimes, the work we do here, it requires sacrifices. We need to keep moving forward. Michael nodded, trying to keep his thoughts in check. Dr. Carter's words had a chilling undertone. This wasn't just about the research anymore. It was about control, and the deeper Michael got into the project, the more he felt like he was losing his grip. I understand, Michael replied, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside of him. But deep down, Michael knew something had to change. He couldn't stay in this situation, caught in the web of Dr. Carter's ambitions, where his work was no longer his own. If he wanted to regain control, he would have to find a way to fight back, before it was too late. The next few days felt like a blur to Michael. His every moment was consumed with the work on the project, but with each passing hour, the gnawing feeling of being used, of being a cog in someone else's machine, became more unbearable. His research, which had once felt like a personal mission, now felt like it belonged to someone else. Dr. Carter's latest move, however, had shifted the power dynamic even further. At the last team meeting, Michael had presented his latest results, an unexpected breakthrough that could have the potential to change the direction of their entire research. It was a moment that could have been a triumph for him. But before Michael could even finish his explanation, Dr. Carter had interjected, his voice smooth and calculated, taking the credit for the idea as if it had been his own all along. Michael had barely been able to contain his frustration. The sting of being overlooked again, the feeling that his work wasn't his own, made his stomach turn. Carter had a way of making it seem like he was doing Michael a favor by including him in the project, and that was something Michael couldn't accept anymore. He had worked too hard, come too far, to be silenced and diminished like this. That night, after the meeting, Michael went back to his apartment, a sense of urgency building inside him. He knew he had to make a decision soon. If he stayed in this situation, the projects would continue to pile on top of each other, but he would never regain control. He would never own his own research. He couldn't let that happen. The next morning, Michael sat at his desk, staring at the drafts of the papers and models that he had submitted. The progress he had made in his independent work seemed to evaporate as soon as it was merged with the collective research, swallowed up by the shadow of Dr. Carter's name. He was angry, but more than that, he was determined. It was clear now that if he wanted to get out of the rut he had fallen into, he would have to take matters into his own hands. Michael spent the entire day working in his lab. The doors were locked, and the world outside seemed to disappear as he pored over the calculations, reviewed the formulas, and began sketching the outline of a new paper, one that was entirely his own. He had all the data, all the results, and all the pieces he needed. What he didn't have was the approval of Dr. Carter, but that didn't matter anymore. He was going to take a risk, a big one. He opened his laptop and began typing, the words flowing from his fingertips as if his body had been waiting for this moment. He knew it was dangerous. Leaving the project without Dr. Carter's approval meant severing ties with the funding, the lab resources, and potentially his reputation. But he also knew that he couldn't live in the shadow of someone else's success, constantly feeling like a spectator in his own life. By the time the evening rolled around, Michael had completed the draft of his new paper. It wasn't finished, there was more work to be done, more data to refine, but it was his work. His ideas, his vision, laid out clearly on the page. He could feel the weight of it in his hands, the culmination of everything he had learned, everything he had fought for, culminating in a body of work that wasn't tainted by the manipulation of others. His phone buzzed, breaking the silence of the room. A message from David popped up on the screen. Heard about the latest project updates. Still thinking about making a move? If you do, I wouldn't wait too long. Carter has eyes everywhere. David's words hit Michael hard. He had already decided to go forward, but now he could feel the weight of David's warning like a cloud hanging over him. The risk was real. Carter wouldn't let him go without a fight. He would find a way to make sure Michael's exit wouldn't go unnoticed, and he would make sure to bury his reputation in the process. But Michael couldn't stop now. He couldn't go back. The next morning, Michael decided to meet with Dr. Morgan. Despite the chaos swirling around him, she had always been his sounding board, his mentor. If anyone could offer insight, it was her. She had always been cautious about the political games that played out behind the closed doors of academia, and Michael trusted her judgment. As he walked into her office, the familiar scent of coffee and old paper filled the air. Dr. Morgan looked up from her desk, her eyes warm but sharp as she took in Michael's expression. She could see it right away, the tension, the restlessness. "Something's on your mind, Michael," she said, setting aside the papers she had been reviewing. "I'm thinking about leaving Dr. Carter's team," Michael said, his voice steady despite the storm in his chest. "I've spent so long working on this, and now it's not mine anymore. I can't let my work be buried under someone else's name. I'm done being a footnote in someone else's success. Dr. Morgan leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. I had a feeling you might be getting to that point. I know it's been tough, but you're not the first one who's felt like this under Carter's leadership. Michael felt a spark of relief. So you think I'm right? Dr. Morgan smiled softly. It's not about being right, Michael. It's about what you want for yourself. If you're feeling that your work isn't being valued, or if you feel like you're being controlled, it's important to take a step back and reevaluate. But understand that the path you're thinking of taking won't be easy. You'll have to be ready for the consequences. Michael nodded. He knew the risks, but that didn't make the decision any easier. I know. I'm prepared for that. Dr. Morgan stood up and walked over to the window, gazing out at the sprawling campus below. She took a deep breath before speaking. It's your career, Michael. But whatever you decide, don't forget the reason you started this journey in the first place. Keep your integrity, and never lose sight of the work you want to create. That night, after leaving Dr. Morgan's office, Michael felt a sense of clarity he hadn't experienced in months. He was ready. He was going to submit the paper, a bold one, full of original ideas and concepts that could shake up the field. It would be a gamble, but it was his gamble to make. And no matter what happened, Michael knew he had to take this first step to regain control over his future. The next morning, Michael sat in front of his laptop once again. With a final breath, he clicked Submit. His paper was sent off to a respected journal, and now the waiting game began. He leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But this was the first move he needed to make, the first move toward reclaiming his work, his vision, and his future. Michael's heart pounded as the days stretched on after submitting his paper. The email notification from the journal had been a rush of adrenaline, but it was followed by the cold, patient waiting that always accompanied such high-stakes submissions. He had made his move. Now, he would have to face the consequences. At first, everything seemed calm. The routine in the lab continued, and he threw himself into his work, keeping his head down and his focus sharp. Dr. Carter barely noticed the change. He had become so entrenched in his own research that he didn't even seem to question Michael's increasing withdrawal from the day-to-day project updates. But the calm was an illusion. One morning, 2 weeks after submitting the paper, Michael walked into the lab, his thoughts preoccupied with revisions he was making on the next phase of his research. As soon as he entered the space, however, the atmosphere felt different. There was a shift in the air, a tension that Michael could feel in his bones. He wasn't sure what it was, but something told him that his move hadn't gone unnoticed. Then, as he rounded the corner to his workspace, he saw it. An email from Dr. Carter. Subject, urgent, we need to talk. Michael's stomach churned. The polite yet commanding tone of the email felt like a harbinger of disaster. He took a deep breath and clicked open the message. Michael. I need to speak with you immediately. It's about your recent work and the paper you submitted. Please meet me in my office as soon as possible today. There are some things we need to address. Best. Dr. Carter. The words hit him like a ton of bricks. There was no preamble, no concern about his well-being, just a command, one that reeked of an impending confrontation. Michael felt his pulse quicken. It was time to face the music. Michael walked to Dr. Carter's office, his thoughts racing. He knew what this was about. His paper had caught attention, but not the kind he was hoping for. He had crossed a line. The question was, how far would Dr. Carter go to make sure Michael fell back in line? When Michael entered the office, Dr. Carter was already sitting behind his desk, his hands folded in front of him, his expression stern but controlled. Take a seat, Michael, Dr. Carter said, his tone measured but cold. Michael sat across from him, his back straight, his mind bracing for what was to come. I've been reviewing your recent work, Dr. Carter began, his voice calm but carrying a hint of underlying frustration. And I have to admit, I'm disappointed. We had an agreement, Michael. You were supposed to be working as part of the team, contributing to the project in a meaningful way. But this paper of yours, it's not only unauthorized, it's an attack on the integrity of the research we've been doing together. Michael swallowed hard but refused to flinch. It's my work, Dr. Carter. I've put in the hours, the research. I've earned the right to have it recognized. Dr. Carter leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. You may have earned the right to your work, but you haven't earned the right to undermine everything we've built here. This research, this project, it's not just about you. It's about the team, the reputation we're building. Do you think your little paper will stand up against the work we've already done? The attention we've already received? Michael gripped the armrests of his chair, fighting the urge to let the tension in the room overwhelm him. I didn't want to undermine anything. I just wanted to take credit for my own research. The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of their meaning. Michael realized, only too late, that the truth had slipped out. Credit? Dr. Carter echoed, his voice rising slightly. It's never been about credit, Michael. It's about collaboration. It's about the bigger picture. You can't just break off on your own without understanding the consequences. Michael took a deep breath, choosing his next words carefully. I understand the consequences. But what I can't accept is being swallowed by the machine. I've worked too hard for my research to be buried under someone else's name. If that means leaving the project, then so be it. Dr. Carter's eyes flared with a mixture of anger and disbelief. You're making a mistake, Michael. You're too eager, too impulsive. You think you're going to make it on your own. Do you have any idea how much harder it's going to be without the resources I've provided you? The reputation that comes with being part of this team. You're throwing it all away. Michael stood up, his heart pounding. Maybe I don't need your resources anymore. Maybe I don't need your reputation. The words were sharp, almost final, but he could see that Dr. Carter wasn't done yet. Dr. Carter stood up slowly, his face tight with frustration. You'll regret this, Michael. You don't know what you're dealing with. I have connections, resources you haven't even begun to comprehend. You think this will be easy? Think again. Michael felt a chill run down his spine. Dr. Carter wasn't just upset, he was threatening him. The reality of the situation settled in like a cold weight. As Michael walked out of Dr. Carter's office, the tension in his chest didn't loosen. It only grew tighter. He had just stepped into a storm. He knew Dr. Carter would try to shut him down. But there was something else too, something darker. The warning in Dr. Carter's words wasn't just about professional consequences, it was personal. Dr. Carter wasn't just protecting his research. He was protecting his ego. And if that meant crushing anyone who threatened it, then Michael had become the target. The days that followed were nothing short of tense. Dr. Carter didn't make his move right away, but it was clear that he was biding his time, watching Michael closely, as if waiting for him to make another misstep. Michael could feel the pressure mounting, but he had already made up his mind. He wasn't going to back down. David's warning echoed in his mind, but this time, it felt different. He was no longer just a bystander in the game Dr. Carter was playing. He was a player himself. Michael's phone buzzed one evening, breaking through the silence of his thoughts. It was a message from David. I hear you had your meeting with Carter. How'd it go? Michael stared at the message for a moment before typing a response. It's not over. But it's a lot more personal than I thought. He's not just trying to shut me down professionally. He's going to try and destroy me. The reply came quickly. Be careful. He doesn't play fair. Neither should you. As Michael stared at the screen, a plan began to form in his mind. He had a long road ahead, but he wasn't going to let Dr. Carter win. The game was just beginning. Michael had never felt so alone. The weight of the decision to go against Dr. Carter hung heavily on his shoulders, but there was no going back now. The quiet days that followed their confrontation were laced with tension. Every time he stepped into the lab, he could feel Dr. Carter's eyes on him, watching, waiting for the next move. And Michael was ready. But even as he prepared for the battle ahead, he knew he would have to be careful. The world of academia was cutthroat. The slightest misstep could ruin a career, and Dr. Carter wasn't the type to let this go without trying to make Michael's life miserable. But Michael was determined. He had already made his move, and he wasn't going to cower under Dr. Carter's scrutiny. Days turned into weeks, and Michael's sense of dread continued to grow. It wasn't just the subtle glares from Dr. Carter during lab meetings or the cold silence that followed their occasional interactions. It was the feeling that everything he had worked for, every ounce of effort he had poured into his research, was now on the line. But still, he couldn't bring himself to give in. Not when his work had the potential to change the field, not when he had come so far. Michael spent countless nights refining his research, poring over data, ensuring that everything he had submitted was sound. He knew that Dr. Carter would try to discredit him, maybe even attempt to take the credit for the paper. But Michael had one advantage that Dr. Carter didn't: the truth. The work was his, and the data spoke for itself. But that didn't mean it would be easy. He had already witnessed the kind of influence Dr. Carter wielded, his connections, his resources, his status. If anyone could make this go away, it was Dr. Carter. And Michael knew it. One afternoon, as Michael sat in the library going over his notes, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from David. "We need to talk. Something's come up." Michael's stomach dropped. David was the only one who knew the full extent of what had happened between him and Dr. Carter. If something had happened to him, Michael couldn't afford to ignore it. He quickly gathered his things and left the library, heading straight for the small cafe near campus where he and David often met to talk in private. When Michael arrived, David was already sitting at their usual table, his face tense and worried. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Michael said, sitting down across from him. David didn't waste time. "I've heard rumors, Michael. Dr. Carter isn't taking this lying down. He's pulling strings. You're in danger." Michael felt his heart skip a beat. "What kind of danger?" David leaned in, lowering his voice. "I heard from some people in the department that Carter is spreading rumors about you, saying you plagiarized your work, that you didn't do the research yourself. He's trying to make sure the journal pulls your paper." Michael's blood ran cold. "What? That's insane. He knows I did the work. I have all the data, all the notes, everything." "I know, man," David said, his voice low. "But Carter is dangerous. He's got connections. He's telling anyone who'll listen that you're a liability to the team, that your work is unoriginal, that you're not trustworthy. He's trying to destroy you before you can make a name for yourself." Michael's mind raced. He had known Dr. Carter would fight back, but this? This was personal. Carter was trying to ruin his reputation, trying to make him out to be a fraud. "How do we fight this?" Michael asked, his voice tight with frustration. David paused, looking around as if to make sure no one was listening. "We need to be strategic. We need to go on the offensive. You can't let Carter dictate the narrative. If he's spreading rumors, we fight back with the truth. Start talking to people. Start documenting everything he's doing. Don't let him control the story." Michael nodded, the resolve in his chest hardening. He wasn't going to let Dr. Carter win. He had worked too hard, and now it was time to make sure the truth was heard. "All right," Michael said, determination in his voice. "I'll gather everything I have. I'll talk to the people who've been on the project with me. And I'm going to make sure this doesn't end with him." The next few days were a blur of meetings, emails, and conversations. Michael reached out to his colleagues, people who had worked with him on his research, people who could back up his claims. He documented every conversation, every interaction with Dr. Carter, every attempt at undermining his work. He needed proof, and he was determined to find it. Meanwhile, Dr. Carter continued to tighten his grip on the department. Michael could feel the walls closing in, but he refused to back down. He knew that if he wanted to keep his career, if he wanted to have any future in academia, he had to confront this head-on. One evening, as Michael was working late in the lab, he received another email notification. This one was from the journal he had submitted his paper to. Subject: Submission status. Dear Michael, we've reviewed your recent submission and, after careful consideration, we've decided to move forward with publishing your paper. However, there have been some concerns raised about the originality of your research. We would like to schedule a call to discuss this further. Best regards. Editor-in-Chief. Michael's stomach churned. His heart was racing. He had been prepared for pushback, but this was a direct response to the rumors Dr. Carter had spread. His work was being questioned. He slammed his hand against the desk in frustration. This wasn't just about the paper anymore. This was about his reputation, his future. Dr. Carter had turned it into a personal vendetta, and now Michael had to fight for his name. He quickly wrote a response, asking for a meeting to discuss the matter further. He wasn't going to let Carter's lies stand. He had the truth on his side, and he wasn't going to back down. Not now. The call with the journal editor was scheduled for the next day. Michael barely slept the night before. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but one thing was clear: he wasn't going to let Dr. Carter take everything from him. He had worked too hard. His work was legitimate, and he was ready to prove it. As he sat at his desk the next morning, preparing for the call, a single thought echoed in his mind: this was it. This was the moment when everything would either fall apart or come together. Michael sat at his desk, the hum of his computer screen the only sound in the room. His hands were clammy as he glanced at the clock. He still had 5 minutes before the call with the journal editor. His mind raced, going over the evidence he'd gathered, the conversations he'd had, and everything that had led to this moment. He had worked tirelessly, and now, his future in academia rested on this single conversation. His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but he knew exactly who it was. He took a deep breath and answered. Hello, this is Michael. Hello, Michael. This is Claire Thompson, Editor-in-Chief at Global Science Journal. I appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. Of course, Michael replied, trying to sound calm, though his heart was racing. I received your email. I understand there are some concerns regarding my paper. There was a pause on the other end, and then Claire spoke again, her voice cool but professional. Yes, we've received several inquiries about the originality of your research. Specifically, there are claims that certain aspects of your work were plagiarized, or at the very least, heavily influenced by research that is not your own. Michael's breath caught in his throat. It was happening. Dr. Carter had made his move. He had anticipated this, but hearing it directly from the journal editor made it all the more real. Dr. Carter wasn't just trying to ruin his career in a subtle way. He was going for the jugular. I can assure you, Michael said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him, that my work is entirely original. Every piece of data, every experiment, is my own. I've followed proper procedures, and I've kept meticulous records. Claire didn't respond immediately. Michael could almost hear her reviewing the notes in front of her. After a few seconds, she spoke again, this time with a slightly more personal tone. Michael, we want to give you the benefit of the doubt. We understand that misunderstandings can happen in this field. But the claims against your research are serious, and we can't ignore them. We need to know, did you source your data and findings independently, or were you influenced by others, especially those within your department? Michael clenched his jaw. The implication was clear: Dr. Carter had not only questioned the authenticity of his work but had also painted Michael as a plagiarist. I understand the concern, Michael began, forcing calm into his voice. But the truth is, my work is based on my own research and findings. I've worked independently for the most part, and any assistance I received was fully documented. As for the claims from my department, Michael hesitated, choosing his words carefully. I believe they are motivated by something other than concern for academic integrity. There was another pause, and Michael could hear the faint sound of typing on the other end of the line. Then, Claire spoke again, her tone a little more uncertain. I understand your position, Michael. But we're in a difficult spot. Several prominent faculty members from your department have raised these concerns, and we need to investigate further before we can move forward with your paper. Michael felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him, but he refused to back down. I've already spoken to my colleagues who can vouch for my work. I've kept all the records, every piece of data. If you want to investigate further, I'm more than willing to cooperate fully. But I assure you, there was no plagiarism, no theft of ideas. This is my work, and I can prove it. Understood, Claire replied, her voice now tinged with a touch of sympathy. We'll take that into account, Michael. But I must warn you, if this issue continues to escalate, it may lead to delays in your paper's publication or, worse, a retraction. Michael's heart sank. He had known the risks, but hearing it laid out so plainly made everything feel more real, more urgent. I understand, Michael said, his voice resolute. But I will not let this go. I've earned my place here, and I won't allow anyone to discredit my work. I appreciate your candor, Michael, Claire responded, her tone softening. We'll review the evidence and let you know our decision as soon as possible. In the meantime, I suggest you speak with your department and try to resolve any misunderstandings before this becomes a bigger issue. Michael's mind was racing. He knew he had to act quickly. Dr. Carter wasn't going to let this go, and Michael couldn't afford to be passive. He had to protect himself, his reputation, and the research he had worked so hard to produce. Thank you, Claire, Michael said, his voice firm. I'll do what I can. But please know, my paper is sound, and I'll fight for it. The line went quiet for a moment before Claire spoke again. We'll be in touch soon. Take care, Michael. With that, the call ended. Michael sat back in his chair, his mind spinning. He had made his case, but it wasn't enough to end this. Not yet. Dr. Carter's influence was far-reaching, and Michael knew this wasn't going to be an easy fight. He had to dig deeper. Michael immediately reached out to David, his fingers flying over the keys as he composed a message. It's worse than I thought. They're investigating. Carter has already started spreading the word. We need to be strategic. I'm going to meet with my colleagues and gather everything I can. We need to shut this down before it gets worse. Later that evening, Michael met with his most trusted colleagues, people who had worked alongside him and knew the truth about his research. As he recounted his conversation with Claire, the group grew quiet. Lena, a fellow researcher who had been a part of his project, spoke first. We have your back, Michael. But we need to act fast. If Carter is trying to sabotage you, we need to make sure we have everything documented. We can't leave any room for doubt. I know, Michael said, a steely resolve in his eyes. I'm gathering every piece of evidence. The notes, the drafts, the data sheets, everything. We need to make sure the journal knows exactly what's been going on here. David nodded in agreement. And we need to make sure that Carter knows we're not backing down. If he thinks he can intimidate you out of this, he's sorely mistaken. Michael felt a surge of gratitude for his colleagues. They weren't just backing him up, they were fighting with him. Together, they would expose the truth. Together, they would ensure that Dr. Carter couldn't destroy what Michael had worked so hard to build. That night, as Michael gathered his documents and prepared for the next phase of his battle, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't alone in this fight. And he wasn't going to lose. The days following the call with Claire Thompson from the journal were a blur. Michael had little time to process the enormity of the situation. Instead, he was forced to move with the urgency of someone fighting for their future. Every moment counted, every piece of evidence needed to be secured, every ally had to be rallied. The weight of the battle weighed heavily on Michael's shoulders, but as he sat at his desk in the lab that evening, he couldn't help but feel a small ember of hope flickering within him. His colleagues, David and Lena, were by his side, working tirelessly to support him. Together, they had assembled a solid case, a timeline of events, emails, data logs, and notes that would show without a doubt that Dr. Carter's accusations were baseless. But the most crucial step was yet to come. Michael knew that for everything to change, he needed to expose Dr. Carter for the manipulative force he was. It was no longer just about defending his research. This was about exposing the hypocrisy that ran rampant through the department, showing the world how someone as powerful as Dr. Carter could easily manipulate the system to ruin careers when his ego was bruised. The first thing Michael did that morning was visit the library to gather every document that would help prove his research was authentic. The more paperwork, lab notes, and email threads he could gather, the more ammunition he had. He knew the journal would need cold, hard facts to make a fair decision. But even as he gathered all the evidence, doubts crept into his mind. What if this wasn't enough? What if Dr. Carter had enough influence to still destroy him? What if the department had already turned its back on him? Michael shoved those thoughts aside. There was no room for doubt now. He had nothing left to lose. He had learned quickly how to navigate academia's complex social structures, how to present his work with professionalism and poise, and how to push forward even when the world seemed to conspire against him. Now, it was time to show that same level of strength in the face of adversity. By the time the meeting with the journal editor was scheduled, Michael had gathered everything he needed. He had not only compiled the evidence from his own research but had also managed to get testimony from colleagues who had worked alongside him. It was clear that Dr. Carter had no leg to stand on. The meeting with Claire Thompson from the journal took place the following Thursday morning. Michael sat in the small conference room, nerves flitting through his stomach as he prepared for the conversation that would either make or break his academic career. He had spent days rehearsing what he would say. This was it. He would make his case, no more second-guessing. As the call connected, Michael's breath caught when Claire appeared on the screen. She was dressed professionally, her expression calm and neutral. "Good morning, Michael," she said, her voice warm but cautious. "I appreciate your patience as we've been reviewing your case. We understand how difficult this situation must be for you." Michael nodded. "Thank you for hearing me out. I've brought everything you'll need to clear up the confusion surrounding my paper." He proceeded to share his screen, going over the documents one by one, explaining how his research had been conducted, and pointing out the key pieces of data and notes that clearly showed his findings were original. He then showed emails, lab records, and reports from colleagues who could verify that the work had been done independently. The evidence was undeniable. "Every step of my process was documented, as it should be," Michael said firmly. "There's not a single piece of data in my research that came from anyone else. As for the accusations that I plagiarized, they are completely unfounded. I'm not sure what Dr. Carter has told you, but I'm prepared to prove this was my work from start to finish." Claire was silent for a long moment, looking over the documents. When she spoke again, her voice had a different edge to it. "Michael, I've reviewed the evidence, and I see what you're saying. It's clear your research is thorough and your data supports your conclusions. But I need to ask, what do you think prompted Dr. Carter to make these allegations? Why would he go this far?" Michael took a deep breath. The moment of truth had arrived. He knew this question was coming. And while he could have stuck to the facts, he knew it was time to tell the truth about Dr. Carter. "I believe Dr. Carter made these accusations because he's threatened by my success. I've worked under him for years, and when I began to independently publish work of my own, it didn't sit well with him. He's used his influence to undermine me, and now he's trying to destroy my reputation in the process." Claire looked up, her expression unreadable. "Are you suggesting that Dr. Carter has intentionally sabotaged your career?" "Yes," Michael said, without hesitation. "I don't think this is a case of misunderstanding or confusion. I believe he's been trying to pull strings behind the scenes to get me discredited. I've been made aware of conversations he's had with other faculty members, painting me as a fraud. It's not just my work that's at stake, it's my entire academic future." There was another silence, heavier than before. Michael could see Claire processing the information, weighing the potential consequences of everything he had said. "Michael," Claire finally spoke, her tone changing again, this time softer. "We take these allegations seriously. And we will not tolerate any attempts to manipulate the system. I'll be conducting a full investigation into Dr. Carter's actions and his involvement in this matter. If what you're saying is true, there will be consequences for his behavior." Michael felt a rush of relief flood through him. It wasn't over yet, but this was the breakthrough he had been hoping for. The editor didn't just believe him, she was willing to act on his behalf. "I appreciate that, Claire," Michael said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I've worked too hard for this. And I'm not backing down. We'll get to the bottom of this," Claire assured him. "And I'll make sure your paper is treated fairly, regardless of the outcome of this investigation. We'll keep you updated every step of the way." As the call ended, Michael leaned back in his chair, a wave of exhaustion washing over him. He had fought for his career, his work, and his future, and now it seemed that his efforts were paying off. The battle wasn't over, there were still many steps to take, and Dr. Carter could still cause problems. But for the first time in weeks, Michael felt a sense of hope. He wasn't alone in this fight. Claire, the journal editor, was on his side. And as for Dr. Carter, Michael had no intention of letting him win. He had taken the first step toward exposing the truth, and he was going to finish what he started. It had been 2 weeks since the conversation with Claire Thompson, and the tension in Michael's life was palpable. While the investigation into Dr. Carter's actions was underway, Michael couldn't afford to sit idly by and wait. The clock was ticking, and his career was still hanging by a thread. He'd been warned that the journal's final decision would take time, but that didn't ease the pressure on his mind. Every day, he feared the next call, the next email. Would they side with Dr. Carter, or would they believe in him? The department was growing increasingly hostile, whispers of the investigation leaking out among his colleagues. Some were sympathetic, offering words of encouragement. But others, those who had been swayed by Dr. Carter's influence, were more wary. The academic world could be cruel, and Michael knew it. He was no stranger to the politics of academia. He spent long hours in his office, going over his research once again, checking the data, refining his notes. Every detail had to be perfect. He couldn't afford any mistakes. If Dr. Carter managed to get away with his manipulation, Michael knew it would set a dangerous precedent. It was late one evening when Michael received an email from Claire. The subject line read simply, "Final decision regarding your paper." His hands trembled as he clicked open the message. "Dear Michael, after careful review of the allegations made against your research, as well as the investigation into the involvement of Dr. Jonathan Carter, we have reached a decision. We can confirm that your research is original, and there is no evidence of plagiarism or misconduct in the work you submitted. In addition, Dr. Carter has been found to have improperly influenced other faculty members, as well as attempted to discredit your work without justification. As a result, Dr. Carter's actions have been reported to the university's ethics board, and we will be working closely with the institution to ensure proper disciplinary measures are taken. Furthermore, your paper will be published as originally submitted. We are excited to have it featured in the upcoming issue of the journal. Thank you for your patience and understanding during this process. We look forward to continuing to work with you. Best regards. Claire Thompson, Editor-in-Chief, Global Science Journal." Michael stared at the screen, unable to believe what he had just read. It felt like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, but there was still a flicker of disbelief in his chest. The fight was over. He had won. But it was more than just the victory in this moment, it was the recognition of the truth. The journal had cleared his name, and Dr. Carter was being held accountable for his actions. For the first time in what felt like forever, Michael could breathe again. His research was safe, his reputation intact. He quickly picked up his phone and called Lena. She picked up after the first ring, her voice tired but eager. "Lena, it's done. The journal cleared me, they found Carter guilty of trying to sabotage me, and they're going to report him to the ethics board." Lena let out a loud, relieved laugh on the other end of the line. "You did it, Michael. We all knew you would. You've worked so hard for this." "We all did," Michael corrected her. "You, David, everyone. We were in this together." There was a brief silence, and then Lena spoke again, her voice more somber. "But what about Carter? What happens to him now?" Michael's smile faltered for a moment. "Carter will be held accountable, but I don't know what that will look like yet. I don't want to get my hopes up, but at least he can't get away with what he tried to do. The system worked this time." Lena's voice softened. "You did more than just protect your work, Michael. You fought for what was right, and that's something to be proud of." In the days that followed, Michael found himself reflecting on everything that had transpired. The investigation had been stressful, exhausting, and at times, incredibly isolating. But through it all, he had grown stronger, more resilient. He had learned that standing up for yourself, even in the face of overwhelming opposition, was not only important but necessary. As for Dr. Carter, the investigation had already begun to ripple through the academic community. Carter was no longer a figure of unchecked power, the truth had been exposed. The University Ethics Board would determine the full extent of the consequences, but Michael knew the damage to Carter's career was already done. The once powerful professor was now in a precarious position, his reputation tarnished beyond repair. But for Michael, it wasn't about watching Carter fall. It was about moving forward. It was about his own journey, his research, his future, and the knowledge that, in the end, the truth had prevailed. A few weeks later, Michael stood in front of a crowd of students and faculty at an academic conference. His paper had been published, and he was now invited to speak about his findings. He felt a rush of nerves, this was a big moment, and he knew it. But he also felt an overwhelming sense of pride. He had earned this. He had fought for it. As he walked up to the podium and began his presentation, he realized that this was just the beginning. His research would now reach the world. He had overcome the odds, faced down personal and professional attacks, and come out on top. But most importantly, he had shown that no one, not even someone as powerful as Dr. Carter, could silence the truth. And that was a victory that would last far longer than any publication. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?